And in fact, the anti-abortion movement has been doing this for years. This is like the major way that they have insinuated themselves into the court. Keep in mind, back in 1976 and 1978, the U.S. Supreme, you know this, I rant about it regularly, the Supreme Court in the Buckley case and the Bellotti case legalized political bribery. Made it legal in 76 for billionaires to buy politicians and in 78 for corporations to buy politicians. They tripled down on that with Citizens United in 2010. Back in the day, though, Democrats, by and large, said, so what? They kind of ignored the ruling in the 70s because they were just awash in cash from the labor unions. A third of Americans were represented by a union. The unions had so much money that it was drawing, corrupt racketeers like Jimmy Hoffa. And, that money was pouring into Democratic campaigns. And so the Democrats were like, big deal. But the Republicans, they were, we can take money from the oil companies. We can take money from the big banks. We can tell, the game was on. And Ronald Reagan floated into the White House in 1980 on a tsunami of oil money. And what was the first thing he did? He went after Jimmy Carter's programs. Jimmy Carter had put into place this solar bank that was going to provide 20% of America's electricity by the year 2000. 23 years ago, it should have happened. And Jimmy Carter's, solar water heaters on the roof of the White House, plus his Carter's commitment to never again will America use more oil than we did in 1977. So, the Republicans taking all this money, it was fairly clear that the Republican Party was corrupt and has been corrupt, basically ever since then. But the Supreme Court, most people think, you can't buy a Supreme Court justice. They don't run for election. You can't pour money into their campaigns. What do you do? Well, it turns out there's this thing called the Supreme Court Historical Society that was started back in 1974 by Chief Justice Warren Burger. And, when it was started, the goal was to basically refurbish old paintings of Supreme Court justices and, literally be a historical society, kind of an academic thing. But what's happened is they've got this fancy headquarters across the street from the Supreme Court building, from the back end of the Supreme Court building. The front end, of course, faces the U.S. Capitol. And this fancy headquarters has become essentially a social club. It's become a place to hang out with Supreme Court justices and clerks and the rich and famous come and they pay $25,000 a year to be a benefactor. They have three different levels. For $5,000 a year, you're a trustee. For $12,500 a year, you're a patron. For $25,000 a year, you're a benefactor. So how does this work? Well, I'll just share with you from what I wrote today, or what I published today. I wrote it yesterday afternoon. When the Sackler family wanted the court's help protecting the billions they'd siphoned out of Purdue Pharma after dooming hundreds of thousands of Americans to a life of addiction and even death, they chose a lawyer who, along with his law firm, had given at least $187,000 to the society. When power companies successfully sued at the Supreme Court to prevent the EPA from regulating their fossil fuel emissions, they chose a patron-level donor who joined the society's board in 2006. When United Parcel Service, UPS, was sued by a pregnant worker for discrimination, saying that they refused to let her go on light duty. They wanted her to continue lifting heavy boxes through her pregnancy. They probably hoped that they could rely, at least in part, on their $550,000 contribution to the Historical Society via their charitable foundation. Ditto for Chevron, which has had multiple appearances before the Supreme Court, and their $190,000 in donations. After Facebook and Twitter and Time Warner donated a combined $50,000, their lead attorneys were given the Society's first amicus curiae awards at an elegant dinner. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing. Around the time Goldman Sachs got a corporate-friendly decision from the court, quote, making it harder for shareholders to mount class action suits alleging security frauds, end quote, as the Times noted, $25,000 went to the society. Reverend Rob Schenck, who was a leader of the anti-abortion movement at the time, advised his colleagues to become donors to the society. He said he couched it as a bargain, advising that $10,000 was enough to get noticed. Right. He also revealed that through the society, he became the guy who knew through another couple to whom Sam Alito leaked the 2014 Hobby Lobby case. When Colorado baker Jack Phillips refused to bake a cake for a gay couple, his case was argued by the First Liberty Institute, which the Times chronicled had given the society $217,000 over a period of years. I mean, this is not shocking or new, frankly. I mean, we knew that, for example, Anthony Scalia and Clarence Thomas were regularly hopping on private jets and flying out to the homes and mansions of billionaires affiliated with the Koch brothers and others, and, you know, being wined and dined. And I mean, Scalia was at one of these fancy resorts when he died. We know that Thomas's wife took between $600,000 and $800,000 from Heritage Foundation at the same time that Heritage Foundation was bringing cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. And Thomas never recused himself. I mean, we know that Scalia did this with Dick Cheney when he was, Dick Cheney was being sued for his secret energy plan. He was being sued, ironically, by right-wingers, by Larry Klayman's group, and who's been on this program. He's, you know, a conservative lawyer. And the charge was that Dick Cheney was secretly planning to sell off all the oil fields in Iraq, and that was the rationale for the Bush administration attacking Iraq, because all their oil buddies were going to get all this oil. And, you know, this went before the Supreme Court, and surprise, surprise, a couple of weeks before the case is heard, Anthony Scalia and Dick Cheney go duck hunting. I mean, it's like, really? Yeah. Neil Gorsuch, you know, addressed the Fund for American Studies, itself funded by the Bradley Foundation, which was helping fund the Janus v. AFSCME case that gutted union protections for government workers that Gorsuch ruled on. I mean, no other federal court in America would allow this. This is a clear violation of every single canon of judicial ethics. But the Supreme Court refuses to be bound by a code of ethics. And it's not like Congress has not tried to do something about this. I mean, the first most recent effort was in 2015, 8 years ago, an effort to stop this. This is Louise Slaughter who proposed this in 2015. Wanted the court itself to come up with its own code of ethics. And the court said, no, thanks. Then Biden's commission on the courts said that the court should adopt an advisory code. John Roberts didn't even comment on it. More recently, you've got the Anti-Corruption and Public Integrity Act from Pramila Jayapal and Elizabeth Warren. Again, it didn't pass. The Republicans filibustered it, and Manchin and Sinema would not let it through the Senate. So, you know, it is very much time for Congress to regulate the Supreme Court, as Article 3, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution says they have not just the power, but, in my opinion, the obligation to do. Is it going to happen? Obviously not during this year and next, when you've got, you know, the House of Representatives in the hands of a totally corrupted Republican Party that's in the bag with these right-wing crazies on the court. But maybe after 2024? Stay tuned. It's 17 minutes past the hour.
Hey, it's Thom Hartmann. We're reading from A Dark Money, the hidden history of the billionaires behind the rise of the radical right in today's Thom Hartmann University Book Club. This is from Chapter 11, page 271. The official opening of the 112th Congress took place on January 5th, 2011, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, handed off an oversized ceremonial gavel to her successor, John Boehner. But a new era of ultra-conservative billionaire influence had already begun. Before the public swearing-in ceremony got underway, David Koch, whose donor network had spent at least $130.7 million on winning a Republican majority, was in the new Speaker-to-be's office, ornate office, chatting amiably with his staff. The People's House was under new management, and critics would suggest new ownership. While Koch was a very public presence on the Capitol, his political adjutant, Tim Phillips, the president of Americans for Prosperity, was deep in the inner sanctum of the congressional committee that mattered most to the bottom line of Koch Industries. Phillips's most important destination that day was the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which under the new Republican majority had now increased its power to block President Obama's environmental agenda in Congress. The committee could bury progress on climate change and harass the EPA for the foreseeable future. And then just jumping through a little anecdote about Lee Fong and David Koch, they continue. In Plutocrats, the rise of the new global super-rich and the fall of everyone else, journalist Krista Freeland describes how those with massive financial resources almost universally use them to secure politics and policies beneficial to their interests, often at the expense of the less well-off. In the United States, a number of studies have shown that in recent years, this tendency has distorted politics in very specific ways. In a study he conducted for the nonpartisan Sunlight Foundation, the political scientist Lee Drutman found that increasingly concentrated wealth in America resulted in more polarization and extremism, especially on the right. Very rich benefactors in the Republican Party were far more opposed to taxes and regulations than the rest of the country. He discovered the more Republicans depend upon 1% of the 1% donors, the more conservative they tend to be. The 112th Congress soon unfolded as a case study of what David Frum, an advisor to the former President George W. Bush, described as the growing and, in his view, destructive influence of the Republican Party's radical rich. The radicalization of the party's donor base, he observed, has propelled the party to advocate policies that were more extreme than anything since Barry Goldwater and his 1964 presidential campaign. It also led Republicans in Congress to try tactics they would never have dared use before, end quote. Hard data supported this. Harvard's Theta Scup poll found that the House took the biggest leap to the far right since political scientists began recording quantitative measurements of legislators' positions. There was no better example than the Koch's newly won influence over the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In the previous Congress, the panel had been chaired by Henry Waxman, the liberal Democrat from California, who had quarterbacked the House's successful passage of the cap and trade bill, only to see it die in the Senate. Now the new Republican leadership stocked the committee with oil industry advocates, many of whom owed huge campaign debts to the Kochs. Koch Industries PAC was the single largest oil and gas industry donor to members of the panel, outspending even ExxonMobil. It had donated to 22 of the committee's 31 Republican members and 5 of its Democratic members, too. In addition, 5 out of the 6 Republican freshmen on the committee had received outside support from Americans for Prosperity. Meanwhile, many of the new committee members had signed an unusual pledge swearing fealty to the Koch's agenda. They promised to vote against any kind of carbon tax unless it was offset by comparable spending cuts, an unlikely scenario. The No Climate Tax pledge was invented by Americans for Prosperity in 2008, when the Supreme Court cleared the way for the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases as it does other pollutants. The Koch's pledge was modeled on the enormously successful one that the anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist had used to intimidate Republican lawmakers from raising taxes. But in this instance, it served not a cause so much as a company. By the start of the legislative session in 2011, fully 156 members of Congress had signed the Koch brothers' No Climate Tax pledge. Many returning members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee had already taken the pledge, and of the 12 new Republicans on the panel, 9 were signatories, including 5 of the 6 freshmen. A prime example of the symbiotic relationship between the Kochs and the committee was Morgan Griffith, who had defeated Rick Boucher in the district that represented Saltville, Virginia, and was among the new wave of appointees to the Energy and Commerce Committee who were openly indebted to the Koch brothers for their seats. Americans for Prosperity operatives were guests of honor at a victory rally soon after the election, at which Griffith gushed, quote, "I'm just thankful that you all helped me out in so many ways," end quote. The Koch's investments soon paid off. Once in office, Griffith became an outspoken skeptic of mainstream climate science, drawing national ridicule for lecturing scientific experts as they testified before Congress that they needed to consider the possibility that Mesopotamia and the Vikings owed their success to global warming, and the melting ice caps on Mars showed that humans were not its cause on Earth. Congressman Griffith became a lead player in the House Republicans' war on the EPA, demanding that the agency be reined in. Within a month after he took office, he and other House Republicans gutted the EPA budget by a punishing 27%.
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, lots going on. It's, what a day, huh? And it's Anything Goes Friday. TGIF, Shabbat Shalom, Juma Mubarak, whatever it may be for you. Hang on just a second here. Got to push a magic button and everything is good. Okay. We got a lot to talk about today, too. It's just you and me for the next 3 hours, which are in some ways my favorite days. I mean, sometimes we get guests on that just blow my mind or I learn a lot from. But, you know, I've got a couple of questions for you, actually, at least for some of the electronics geeks among you. But, you know, some of the things we're going to get to today, I want to talk about depression. John Fetterman just checked himself into Walter Reed for clinical depression. I have a story about that to tell you. Also, the outrageous new way Big Pharma is trying to rip us off. I have a science question for you about powering your house with a car. I'll get to that in a second. Tyree Nichols, we're learning more about that case, and I've got a story to tell you about that, too. Also, Pharmacist, this in the second hour, we'll get into this. A pharmacist has refused to give a COVID booster. Why does anybody work at a pharmacy if they don't believe in science? But wait, there's more. How about being charged with a crime and going to prison for giving a COVID shot to somebody? Well, yeah, there's actually a state that's talking about doing that. What if the Senate is really getting behind and fine-tuning minority rule? It appears that the Republican Party is all about this. Also, we've got a Geeky Science. Can preventing dementia and cognitive impairment, even starting in your 60s, just be a few thousand steps away? In other words, starting the prevention. Also, has the Michigan GOP, this is the third hour of our program, has the Michigan Republican Party been taken over in a coup by the far-right so-called militia types? And what do they do about it? And armed community groups are protecting drag queens from Christian fascists. And I don't mean that as a slur. These people call themselves Christian fascists. And Coulter has some choice words for Nikki Haley, telling her to go back to her own country. I believe she was born here. But anyhow, that's some of the stuff for today. Let me just start out. John Fetterman was checked into this hospital. Now, I have been looking for years, and maybe some of you who are really good with research can back me up on this. I remember this like it was yesterday because it was such a shocking report to me. It was such an amazing report to me. This was back in the 60s or 70s, late 60s, early 1970s. I was listening to WKAR, which is the Michigan State University NPR station. And they were talking about a study that probably couldn't be done now because of ethical concerns, where they were observing chimpanzees in the wild in some country in Africa, or maybe in Southeast Asia. And they noticed that about the same percentage of chimps as humans were exhibiting the classic symptoms of clinical depression. They withdrew from their friends. In fact, they tended to hang out around the perimeter of the troop, the monkey tribe, or the chimpanzee tribe. They didn't sleep well. They were up half the night. They were hypervigilant, almost kind of bordering on, not paranoia, but, you know, just constantly noticing things that were potential threats. And so they thought, okay, we're gonna get rid of these bummer monkeys and see what happens. And so they darted, you know, it didn't kill them. They just tranquilized the half a dozen or so monkeys out of this monkey troop, chimpanzees. I realize I'm probably making the scientists among you crazy by using terms incorrectly, but you know what I'm talking about. They darted these depressed chimpanzees, pulled them out of the troop, and then, you know, said, okay, let's watch and see what happens, thinking, okay, you know, it's going to turn into Party Central because the bummer guys are gone. And what happened was, within a few months, more than half of the entire monkey troop was dead. It turned out that the depressed monkeys, because they withdrew to the perimeter of the monkey group, because they were hypervigilant, because they were up half the night wide awake, they were the ones who noticed that the cheetah was, or the lion or tiger was sneaking up on, or the boa constrictor was coming to kill other chimpanzees. They were the early warning system. Now, back in the 90s, when I wrote my books on attention deficit disorder, probably the most well-known one is called ADHD, Hunter in a Farmer's World. I hypothesized that this gene for ADD survives in our genome. There must be a reason, right? There must be some evolutionary benefit to it, or it wouldn't be there. I mean, even horrible things. Cystic fibrosis actually protects against tuberculosis. It was useful back in the days when there were tuberculosis epidemics that killed people before they got to be 10 years old. Tay-Sachs against something, I forget what it is, some contagious disease. Sickle cell anemia protects against malaria. So, these things that we think of as diseases actually had some benefit in our distant evolutionary past. And apparently depression does too. At least, if that study had any accuracy. And common sense kind of suggests it would. So, I think it's wonderful that John Fetterman is acknowledging this. I believe it's 1 in 8 Americans experiences at least one major depressive episode during their life. We need to come out of the closet about this, or out of the shadows about this, and talk about it. I think it's a good thing. And I just want to honor him and his family. His wife is speaking out about this. She said, well, John has experienced depression on and off throughout his life. His life had only became severe in recent weeks. I'm sorry, that was his chief of staff, Adam Jettison. His wife, Giselle Bartoretto Fetterman, said in an email, it's not easy for anyone to be open about mental health challenges, but I am so proud of him for asking for help and taking steps to get the care he needs. And, and he's been living alone in D.C. without his family for a couple of weeks, and he just had like this major stroke. It's got to be really rough. So I just wanted to say that, God bless John Fetterman. We'll see, how this affects him and his career. I don't think it's going to be anything close to the old Tom Eagleton thing, when he was, whose running mate was he? George McGovern, as I recall? Yeah. And Tom Eagleton, it turned out, had, been hospitalized twice. In fact, he had gone through electroshock therapy, and that was around the time the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest was coming out. So it kind of freaked people out. But I think we have a better understanding, and we have better drugs and, all that kind of stuff. So number one. Number two, I have a question for the electronics geeks out there. Louise and I were talking to a solar guy a couple days ago. We're thinking of putting some solar panels on our house. The government now gives you a 30% tax credit on these things, which is huge. That's a lot of money, right? And we were thinking of putting some batteries in the garage that would, power the house, because, the solar power isn't enough, and particularly since we have a heat pump, although we probably wouldn't even get close enough to having enough electricity to generate heat. So we're also we've got a small fireplace. We're looking about putting a pellet stove in there or something like that. But the guy said, and I thought this was fascinating, he said, it was like, tens of thousands of dollars for the initial installation, because you got to replace your breaker panel, and you got to do this whole song and dance with the power company. And then it was like, these 10 kilowatt battery units are like, $10,000 a piece, or some mind-boggling amount of money. And I said, I've got an Ioniq 5, and he says, well, you've got a 100 kilowatt battery in that car. That's like, you'd have to pay $30,000 for the battery system like that in your house. So just plug your car into your house. There's a way to do that. And he was talking about all these fancy things and these two-way systems and all this. Well, I went online on Amazon, and I found this thing that you can plug into the part of your car where you plug it in to charge it. And on the back end of it is a little 115-volt outlet that'll give you continuous 15 amps. And, if I've got 100 kilowatts in my car, that 15 amps will last a hell of a long time, as long as I'm not trying to run an electric stove, or a dishwasher, or a clothing, washer or dryer, or the heat pump. But it would keep the lights on, because they're all LED lights, it would keep the computers on, it would keep the TV on, it would keep the internet on, all those things, probably for days. So here's my question, if you know the answer to this, if you're an electrician, because I'm not. I understand electronics. I was once a licensed electrical engineer. I'm a ham radio operator, but I'm not a household electrician. I don't know this stuff. If I create an extension cord that's got a male grounded 115-volt plug on both ends, I plug one end into this thing in my car. I turn off the mains to my house, so my house is disconnected from the power grid. And I plug the other end of that into an electrical outlet. It seems to me like my car would then power my house via that electrical outlet, as long as my house cumulatively is not drawing more than 15 amps, which is what the car is capable of giving, or 20 amps, which is what the breaker will handle. Now, the breaker is also a GFI breaker, and I don't know if you can run power through those things backwards. So I realize a lot of what I just said is probably gibberish to most people, but if you happen to know what I'm talking about, I would love to know your answers. I would love to know what you think. The final story I wanted to tell you, actually I'll tell you on the other side of the break, and then I'll get into my rant for the day about Big Pharma and how they're trying to rip us off. But it has to do with Tyree Nichols and the Memphis Police Department. And what I saw when I was doing international relief work back in the 80s down in Bogota, Colombia. And it was pretty amazing. And I'm wondering if these cops are doing the same thing, because it was the cops in Bogota that were doing this. I'll tell you about that after the break. I'll pick up your phone calls too. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It is also Anything Goes Friday, so we'll be right back. And welcome back. Mark Taylor Canfield in Seattle. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I hope you're doing well.
So far, so good? Knock wood?
Good.
You too?
Your program is very popular here in Seattle on Pacifica affiliate KBCS, where I used to work with some really great journalists on Free Speech Radio News. But I wanted to let you know...
Isn't that a great station?
Yeah. I'm really excited about the fact that I just released a song called Sold Me Down the River that relates to slavery on Spotify and Apple Music and all the major platforms. Yes, I'm a composer and a musician as well as a journalist. But the reason I'm calling you today is about the Seattle City Council races in Seattle, because I'm actually thinking about running as a candidate. Since there's going to be 4 open seats, it's going to be a big shakeup on our council this year in November.
Wow,
and our Democratic Socialists, Shama Sawant, who helped start the whole $15 an hour minimum wage movement that went national and has been very instrumental in supporting the rights of Starbucks and Amazon workers to organize labor unions. She's announced she's going to retire to become a labor leader and work on labor issues. And but here's some of the issues. Okay, so it looks like we just passed Initiative 135, the social housing measure, so that's a good sign. And there's actually been a lot of tech industry layoffs here too. So between high rents, lack of affordable housing, homelessness, and these tech layoffs, those are kind of the issues that all the candidates are going to have to address. Mm-hmm. It's a nonpartisan position. And there's a $5.25 million available to the candidates via our public financing program through the democracy vouchers, where each individual voter gets to allocate $100 in public funds to the candidates of their choice.
That is so cool.
And that's true for city council, mayor, and the city attorney. Uh-huh. So I'm thinking about running because, I would really like to bring some of these issues up on the city council, and it might be the time, since there's 4 open seats. Some of them are at-large seats, and some of them are district seats.
So do you have a question, or did you want to make an announcement? Do you have a website?
Well, Mark Taylor Canfield, I do have a website at Wix. It's kind of a complicated website address. So it's probably best just to put Mark Taylor Canfield in your local search engine and see what you come up with. But I'm wondering, are these some of the issues that people are dealing with in Portland right now? And what's the city council situation like down there?
Portland's a mess. Portland is just a mess. I am not impressed by the competence of our city council here. We also have a city council system that is going to be changing this year as a result of a ballot initiative that was bizarre. I mean, it was set up back in the 19th century, I believe. And the biggest crisis that we have here is that the police are not responding to crime. Car thefts are through the roof. I mean, over 1,000 a year now. One of my kids has had 2 of her cars stolen. Older cars are always at risk because they can be jacked, you know. And basically, it's like Uber for homeless people. You know, if they want to get someplace, they just smash in the windows of a car, steal a car, drive it someplace, and leave it there. And so that, you know, around the homeless camps, you're just constantly finding, you know, abandoned, stolen cars. That's probably the biggest issue in the city right now. That and all the camps downtown. It's just a mess, Mark. Just a mess.
Do you guys have public financing of the campaign down there?
No, we don't. At least not to the best of my knowledge. When you get a website that's easy to promote, if you decide to do this, let me know. I'd be glad to help you promote it. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Well, it appears that American business has a cranky right-wing billionaire problem. This is really getting bad. Tesla fired dozens of their workers at their Buffalo, New York plant after the workers sent an email to Elon Musk, the owner, principal owner of Tesla, notifying him that they were going to start unionizing or a campaign to create a union for the company. So he just went and fired them all. Meanwhile, over at Starbucks, the interim CEO, Howard Schultz, another billionaire, is basically telling Bernie Sanders and the committee that he is the chairman of in the United States Senate, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, to go screw themselves. He just said he's not going to do it. He's not going to show up. Bernie says apparently it's easier for Schultz to fire workers who are exercising their constitutional right to form a union than it is to answer questions from elected officials. There's a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. So, a couple of other quick things here that I wanted to share with you. Number one, my story from Bogota. When I was down in Bogota, Colombia, the Catholic Church had offered us some land down in Medellin, and we traveled down there and checked it out. And it turned out there'd been this slaughter of nuns down there. So we turned it down. But while I was in Bogota, I discovered that there was this part of town that had basically been abandoned by everybody. It had been taken over by young people. Homeless young people, whatever, they called them los gamines, the little animals, the little wild animals. And what I learned from a friend who lived there, whose husband was like in the city government somehow, I forget, like city council kind of thing, was that there was these hunt clubs that had formed. One of them actually had patches that they sewed on their jackets. And what these guys did is they went out at night with high-powered rifles into these neighborhoods and shot children. And then took pictures of it. And had like trophies. And the big scandal that had happened around that time was that it turned out one of these guys in one of these hunt clubs was a member of the police department in Bogota. And I don't know if you can easily Google this or not. This was back in the 80s. It was before, the internet was even really a thing. But in fact, it might have been the late 70s, 79, 80, 81. It was right around then. But now we're discovering that these 5 cops who murdered Tyree Nichols, at least one of them was taking pictures of his beaten, bloody body and texting them to their buddies, just like I was hearing when I was in Bogota was being done by these hunt clubs. I mean, apparently this is something that some men like to do is, hunt other people, kill other people, take the pictures and use them like trophies. And I'm just horrified. So I just had to share that story with you. My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com, it's titled "The Outrageous New Way Big Pharma is Trying to Rip Us All Off." And what it's about basically is this thing called March In. And what March In means is that if a drug is developed using federal money exclusively, that drug cannot be given to the big pharma companies. Now, the whole goal of this was to make sure that the drugs would be made available to people at a reasonable price. That patent for that drug which is typically held by a university. In the case of one of these COVID drugs, it was Emory University, can only be transferred to a nonprofit organization or a small company. So what's happened is there's this whole industry of little tiny companies. Ridgeback is one of them in this case, the example that I used in this story. These little tiny companies that acquire these patents and then just turn around the next day and sell them to the giant big companies for millions and millions of dollars and get around the law this way. And in this case, it was Merck that bought this drug that costs $17.74 for a 5-day course. It's a COVID drug. And they're selling them for $712 each. I mean, they're ripping us off. And we developed the drug. Now, there are members of Congress who are trying to put a stop to this. There are other members of Congress who are trying to help out Big Pharma in continuing this process. What would put a stop to it is a process called March In, which is where the government kind of marches in and says, wait a minute, you can't rip people off because we paid for this drug. And that has not been enforced. It was not enforced throughout the entire Trump administration, and the Biden administration is just now looking at it. And this is a hot topic within the Biden administration right now. So if you want more details, go over to HartmannReport.com. It's the top story. You can read it. And it might be something you want to reach out to your members of Congress about.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
So a lot on the table. Plus, it's Anything Goes Friday. If you want to talk about UFOs or whatever, you know, the Kennedy assassination. We'll pick up your calls after the break.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is
Harvey J. Kaye, Professor Harvey Kaye, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. This is from the introduction. On December 1st, 1862, in the midst of the Civil War, just weeks before he was to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his annual message to Congress. Lincoln firmly believed that the United States had an historic responsibility to demonstrate to the world that people can govern themselves, make equal rights not just a self-evident truth, but a manifest one, and create a political and economic order in which working people, both white and black, are not compelled to bow to anyone, neither aristocrats nor capitalists. Empowered by tens of thousands of black slaves who were already liberating themselves from bondage by escaping to the Union lines, and increasingly confident that the majority of his fellow Americans would recognize the truth of what he was saying, Lincoln closed his address by calling on them to see that the time had come to remember who they were and what they demanded, or what that demanded. He told them that to save the nation and all that it represented, they must live up to the nation's declared revolutionary purpose and promise and act to radically enhance American freedom by bringing an end to slavery. This is a quote from Lincoln's address. Fellow citizens, we cannot escape history. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. We say we are for the Union. The world will not forget that we say this. We know how to save the Union. The world knows we do know how to save it. We, even we here, hold the power and bear the responsibility. In giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. We too, end of quote from Lincoln, back to Harvey. We too cannot escape history. Our own struggle to save the nation and the promise it proclaims has begun. Finally, after more than 40 years of fear-driven class war and culture war campaigns against the democratic achievements of generations, the hard-won rights of workers, women and people of color, and the very memory of how they were secured, and now both in the wake of the election debacle of 2016, which gave the presidency to the corrupt, mendacious, racist, sexist, and treacherous demagogue Donald Trump, and continued control of Congress to the formerly conservative but increasingly reactionary Republican Party, and in the face of intensified class and culture war campaigns,
we the people have come not only to recognize that American democratic life is in jeopardy, but also to mobilize in hopes of saving it. Millions of us have rallied to the resistance and expressed our democratic fears and desires in action. In the historic Women's March and March for Our Lives of young people, the protests, demonstrations, and legal actions to defend the lives and rights of immigrants and refugees, the Me Too movement to combat sexual assault and harassment, the massive teachers' strikes for higher pay and better funding of public schools in states red and blue, and the enthusiastic canvassing and campaigning for a blue wave to win back Congress in the 2018 midterm elections. But resistance is not enough. The time has come for us to remember who we are and what that demands. The time has come for us to embrace our radical history, the history of how a generation of Americans, high and low, and in all their diversity, not only turned their colonial rebellion into a war for independence, but also imbued American life, whether they all intended it or not, with radical imperative and impulse by declaring a revolutionary promise of freedom, equality, and democracy for all. The history of how generations of radicals and reformers served as the prophetic memory of that promise, and how generations of ordinary men and women, native-born and immigrant, struggled to make real the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and to expand not only the we in We the People, but also the powers of the people. And most especially in view of the crises we ourselves face, the history of how our greatest generations confronted and prevailed over the forces that threatened to destroy the nation and bury its revolutionary promise in the 1770s, 1860s, and 1930s and 1940s, not to mention the 1960s, by acting to make the United States, both inspired by Washington, Lincoln, and FDR, and pushing them to go farther than they might otherwise have gone, radically freer, more equal, and more democratic than ever before. The time has come to take hold of that history and make America radical again. I've titled this collection of my speeches and essays, Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again, for reasons that will become obvious. And yet I cannot help but confess that if I had had to title it otherwise, I would have been sorely tempted to use, with full attribution, the title Max Lerner gave to his 1938 work, It Is Later Than You Think, The Need for a Militant Democracy. While it may not seem so, the crisis we face is no less demanding of action, urgent action, than that which confronted his generation. The book Take Hold of Our History by Harvey J. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. I am hoping somebody out there has the solution to my question about whether I can just back power my house from my car with a $10 extension cord instead of having to have an electrician come in and completely replace the panel and all this kind of stuff. I realize it's a kludge, and I realize it's off code, and it's probably, well, I don't know. I don't know if it's illegal, but maybe it's not even a good idea. Anyhow, I'll pick up your calls here. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois, or Hickory Hill, excuse me. Hey, Russ, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I have to call. I'm watching these candidates for the Republican Party. I mean, you got Nikki Haley kicking sideways and cut Social Security.
Right.
Pence, they want to hang him.
Right, and he just came out for ending Social Security and Medicare, too.
Right.
With his
and then
better
you got
deal.
Pence, DeSantis, stay out of it now. You're only 44. And then this is for all you people in Maryland. The Hogan, I don't know if you heard this. This is quoted from him. I'll campaign for him and I'll vote for him. That's your moderate Republican, Tom, like your Mitt Romney.
Right.
I'll back Trump to the back. And let's be frank, Tom. You go to Arizona, they got a 1-seat House and 1 seat in the Senate. They lose them, we take it over. Arizona, Phoenix is almost gone. No, I mean Pennsylvania. We're only 3 seats in the Senate from taking the whole state back there.
Yeah.
I mean, and then what's their answer? 55 and older people in Florida. get ready to pay $2,000-$3,000 for rent when they destroy these 55 and older places.
Yep.
We'll see how long they keep getting the Republican. But, Nikki, what the hell does kicking sideways mean? I mean, is this girl an airhead? Oh. And Tim Scott, too, now. He's rising to the top, yeah. I got a puppet that would do better than him, Tom.
Yeah. I
mean, the guy's a clown.
I get it. I don't see, unless they go back to Mitt Romney, who did a pretty reasonable showing once and is I don't like his policies, but, he's at least a relatively honorable man. A little, nutty with his religious stuff, but as long as he doesn't want to make that into law, I don't have a problem with that. And he does respect the separation of church and state, at least to the best of my knowledge. Unless they go back to somebody like Mitt Romney, I think this party is one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to go the way of the Whigs, they're going to disintegrate, or get taken over, by the Mitt Romneys of the world, or the fascist element within the GOP, which is now looking like it's 60 or 70% of the entire party, is going to take over the party entirely and then take over the country. And we're going to go down the same painful road that Italy and Germany did and learn the same painful lessons. And, 10 years later, after the country is ruined and we've been through a world war, we'll put ourselves back together and say, okay, never again.
Well, you got the other idiot, Tom. You ain't even talked about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Yeah. How about Boberg?
Yeah.
What did she say? And when they were talking to Twitter, how dare you kick me off? I have free speech. Right. Oh, but Muskie can kick the liberals off. I don't hear him complaining. Of course, and I know, Tom, come 2024, Boberg ain't going to win re-election. If she can't win in a state that she's got 30,000 more people.
Yeah, I'm hearing that Andy Frisch is going to, the guy who ran against her last time and only lost by like 500 some odd votes.
500 votes.
Yeah.
And they got 150,000 to 120,000 votes. And how are you going to win, Tom, you say?
And he says he's already announced he's going to run again, or at least announced that he's serious. I mean, his name is in the news. I don't know if he's made a formal announcement or filed the paperwork yet, but there's every indication that he's going to run against her again.
Well, you heard what they did with Marjorie Taylor Greene's district. It was iffy. They kicked all the Democrats out. Now she's a 25-point favor.
Yeah. So
she can stay there. And every time I see Steve Kornacki, Georgia looks like another blue county they took over.
Yeah.
I don't care where it is.
No, they're rigging the system, and they've rigged the systems in Texas, Florida, and Georgia, and other states as well. Not quite as egregiously as in those three states, but Republicans are rigging these systems in these states so that they'll never lose elections. And a large part of that is never even covered by the media, which is the millions and millions and millions of Democratic voters that they purge from the voting rolls every other year, every single election cycle. Russ, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Carol in Menneson, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I think you're probably the most well-informed person on TV, if not the smartest. So I would like your opinion on something. Why do you think that the Republican Party wants to put a liar, a cheat, a grifter, and a criminal back in the presidency? He was twice impeached even. I mean, he's the most failed president I know of, and yet they want him back. And I don't understand what the Republicans see in this man and why they would ever want to put him back in the White House. And I'd like your opinion on that.
Trump appeals to the basest instincts of a certain type of man and some women. To the kind of person who would like to go watch a public execution. Trump called for this 3 days ago. He said that, we need to go back to public hangings and public hangings and firing squads. He appeals to men who hate women or fear women or resent women. He appeals to racists. He himself is all of those things. And he's not unwilling to say it right up front, right out loud, in ways that other Republican candidates have always relied on dog whistle to do, and which makes him a formidable force as long as 20-30% of the American white population is that deeply embedded in that kind of violent racism.
Yeah, I don't understand that. And the other thing that I don't understand is something you just mentioned a minute ago, if you don't mind my asking. When I grew up in the 50s, I was in grammar school then, right?
Yeah, me too.
And I know. And I don't understand why. When I was growing up, I never heard the word mass shooting, okay?
Yep.
I never heard of it. And what happened to this country that all of a sudden we have this just proliferation of mass shootings in a country? What is responsible for that? I don't think it's enough to say we have more guns. There has to be some underlying reason for this, because it was unheard of when I was in school.
I don't think it's that complicated, though, Carol. I mean, when we were kids, the number of guns in circulation was about the same as it is in Canada, and Canada doesn't have a mass shooting problem either. I think that the people who are committing mass shootings, generally fall into two broad categories. People who are trying to commit suicide and go out in a blaze of glory, and with easy access to a gun, they do that. And that was happening back when you and I were kids, but it was pistols, and basically people weren't going to the mall and shooting 10 people. They'd kill members of their own family, that kind of thing. Or their next door neighbor. I mean, that was not unheard of back when we were young.
No, it wasn't unheard of.
They didn't have AR-15s.
The term mass shooting, I'm sorry.
They didn't.
The term mass shooting wasn't even part of our vocabulary, even when I was in high school.
Because the mass part of it requires a lot of bullets. And, it was illegal back then to get magazines that held, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 bullets. You didn't have guns, semi-automatic weapons that fired that many guns. I really think it's the technology. I mean, it's the same reason that we're getting lots and lots of, the video that we're seeing of, police beating people up. It's not like there's been a change. It's just that we know about it now because of the technology. I think it's the gun technology. I really do think it is that simple, that there's more guns.
Really?
And here's the proof of that.
I don't know.
In 1996, a guy in Tasmania, which is a little island state, off the southern coast of Australia, murdered 37, as I recall, 36 or 37 people with a high-powered rifle.
Right.
The newspapers published some of the pictures of how badly mutilated the bodies were. The whole country went into shock. Within a month or two, they had passed gun legislation outlawing these high-capacity magazines, outlawing these assault weapons, essentially, and put into place a nationwide buyback program where they bought back these guns from people at more than they were worth. And people turned in hundreds of thousands of guns. Prior to that 1996 mass shooting, Australia was having a mass shooting once or twice a year. In the following 10 years, they had one. Just one.
But why can't we do something like that here? I mean,
I think
we
should.
Can't even get background checks passed, let alone get these damn guns off the street.
I think we should, but the experience of Australia proves, in my mind, that if you just get the guns out of the way, you get. And the other thing is, half of gun deaths are suicides, and if there was a 3-day waiting period to get a gun, a lot of 3 days would decide not to commit suicide. Suicide is very often, about half the time, it's a spur-of-the-moment decision. So, I mean, there are some fairly simple solutions to this. It's just that as long as the weapons continue to own the Republican Party, ain't going to happen.
Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 45 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls here on Anything Goes Friday. You and me for 3 hours. Stick around. And welcome back. Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's on your mind today?
Happy Anti-Fascist Friday, Tom.
There you go. I forgot to say that. Thank you. What's up?
That's okay. I'm going to wear my public service hat today and make two announcements. This Sunday, the New York 19th Congressional District Indivisible Group is holding a meeting to organize and flip New York 19 back to blue. People are welcome to come. If they want to find out information about it, go to the bottom of my site, endbribes.com, and I have information on it there.
Great. Endbribes.com.
That's right. And I would like to thank the Democrats and the Inflation Reduction Act. My internet bill has been reduced by $30 a month.
Huh? Why?
And
how?
Go to affordableconnectivity.gov, or look at the bottom of my site. I have a link there to it, and that's how it's done. Now, let me explain. There's a couple of ways it can be done because I've been helping family and friends do it also. Mm-hmm. The best way I found is I went to my internet provider, found they had a link there to apply. I went and applied, and they asked if I wanted to apply. I said yes, and they applied for me, and I got it. Huh. And now I'm getting my internet bill with it reduced by $30 per month.
Is this, I'm assuming this is means tested?
Yes, there is some means testing, but I think it's fairly broad.
Uh-huh.
You know, but it is income is a lot of it. But I think if you have school-age children, you might be eligible as well.
Huh. That's great.
So I'm not quite fully.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the means testing. I was just curious. I mean, it's.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm kind of confused by it because there's a lot of stuff there about it.
Yeah.
But I got it with no problem. And if I helped some other people do it by going to affordableconnectivity.gov, and we did it that way. And the one thing about that is once you're approved, you got to wait 2 days for the system to update. And then you have to contact your internet provider and give them the information. Mm-hmm. So it works that way as well.
Okay.
So I wanted to make people aware of that.
Register with the government and then pass that registration to your internet service provider. Good.
Yeah, or if your internet service provider has the information at their site, do it that way because it is really quick and simple. Mm-hmm. And I'm enjoying $30 off a month.
Not too shabby. That's great, Ziggy. That is
all right.
Great.
That's all I really want to let you know. Hey, one quick question.
Yeah, sure.
I like your new bumper music. Is that AI generated?
No, it's it's a weird story. There's companies that make bumper music and they sell CDs of it, And years ago we bought a CD of bumper music, and we've been using it for years. And last year, some company bought out this company that we had bought it from, and every year we were paying a license fee, and they stopped sending us bills for the license fee. And I thought, okay, they've probably gone out of business, but we kept using the music. All of a sudden, we started getting dinged on YouTube for copyright violations. And apparently the company had bought the discs that we had, and they were claiming that they were theirs. So we just said, screw it. We paid $300 to another company that licenses them. I got a really cool library. Sean picked out a bunch of new music and put it in. We did that last week. So
I like it. I like it. It's good.
Good. Oh, Sean's got great taste in music. She used to be a music DJ. She knows what she's doing. Ziggy, thank you. You're the first person who's commented on it. I'm glad to hear that it works. Ziggy, thanks a lot for the call.
Take care.
Got to run. It is 49 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. James Baldwin was one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, of any type, but his insights into black cops and police in general are just brilliant. This is one of his writings about black policemen. He said, "Black policemen were another matter. We used to say, if you must call a policeman, for God's sake, make sure it's a white one." And we hardly ever did call a policeman. A black policeman could completely demolish you. He knew far more about you than a white policeman could, and you were without defenses before this black brother in uniform, whose entire reason for breathing seemed to be his hope to offer proof that, though he was black, he was not black like you. Baldwin goes on to talk about black cops and his father and his relationship with his father and just the general violence perpetrated against black people. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. It's before the hour, picking up your calls. Katie in Hamul, California. Hey, Katie, what's up?
Hi, I for one thing, I've got something new in my vocabulary, and that is bummer monkey.
Is what?
You said it made it. Well, you said they take the bummer monkey.
Oh, bummer monkeys.
The ones that are bummer monkey. I love it. Can I have it?
Sure.
You're such a bummer
Isn't that a great
monkey.
story? I mean,
it's absolutely, yeah.
I have been searching for it for years because I included it in one of my books, and I had to put all these disclaimers saying I couldn't find this study, but I remember hearing it on WKAR, and but again, it was back in the 80s, and anyway, back to you, Katie.
So now we have a link to it because I have a sister who had a stroke and is going through what Fetterman is going through, and so I hope to put that link in there. I have a question I've been wanting to ask you. I just got back from Australia, so I can finally call you. Listen, and by the way, really quickly, the gentleman who was moving to, I think, Nigeria or something like that, and he was kind of bemoaning not being able to get you.
He hadn't quite figured out which country he was going to. Nigeria was one he was looking at, and Ghana.
I cannot say enough for us, those of us who are expats or semi like I am, is for Patreon. And that's it. I'm plugging Patreon, and now I will move on. But I listen every day in Australia to all of my friends. But anyway, that would be your
Oh, yeah. In other words, a lot of shows show up on that site. I get it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, but that's how I stream you through that. But listen, what I want to ask is a really simple but profound and deeply disturbing question for me. I have two kind of aging millennial children in Australia, but that doesn't matter, who are looking at their biological clocks and doing, I think, what AOC was doing. I see no reason for anyone with the means to control reproduction to have children. And my mother, who was born in 1913, told her three daughters, and she was a student, she was a social worker, and Paul Ehrlich and Rachel Carson were her go-to people, but she was a phenomenal reader, and she said, this is not going to go well. I work with people. I know people. This is not going to go well. Please don't. And I was the one that did. And I want to know straight out, and you have two grandchildren, what reason in the world is there for anyone, again, who can control whether they have children or not, to have children, period? That's just, give me your take on that.
First of all, my two grandchildren are adopted, which I'm very proud of.
I do know that.
I'm proud of my daughter.
I do know that.
For that. And I encourage people to adopt children. There's so many children who are in need of adoption. But I would add that I think it's just a human instinct. I mean, I look at my own children and I see so much of myself and I see so much of my parents. I think it's just a human instinct to have that little
one
bit
that
of
I
immortality.
acted on, and my sisters did not. But logically, my mother was right. Logically, I'm looking at my kids and going, and they're in their mid-late 30s, and I'm going, oh my God, this is not going well. I don't want grandchildren. Give me puppies. And so I understand that part. Why would you tell someone that's go ahead and have a child in this world, one of your, children that hasn't reproduced?
Well, I wouldn't tell them not to, at least my own children, because I wouldn't want them to think if they had children that I disapproved. But I would tell the public, and I've written about this in Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, that overpopulation is a crisis, but I don't think the solution to overpopulation is to shame women or families into not having children. I think the solution is to empower women and give them a choice. Because what we find is that when women have equal political and economic power with men, then reproduction rates drop below 2. So population slowly declines.
I know that, but it's not a question of shame. It's a question of logic. And believe me, my mother embraced my grandchildren. My grandchildren, right? My children, they were the love of her life, but she still thought that I had made a bad decision. It's not personal. It's not my children. They adored their granny. And it's just that I am sitting, of course, it doesn't matter what I say because I don't intrude that much. My kids know that I feel just like their granny felt about reproduction. So they do know how I feel.
Yeah.
But it's not a shame thing. It's just a logic. And when you take what we're in now and you expand it out 40 years, well, 10 years, 20 years, do you want someone you love dearly, your grandchildren, to live in this world?
Yeah, that's another tough question because, I can imagine apocalyptic scenarios 40, 50, 60, 70 years down the road. I mean, my grandchildren will probably be alive 70 years from now, and it's going to be a very different world. I know that. On the other hand, I also know that the human species is extraordinarily adaptable. I mean, we've adapted to every climate on Earth, every microclimate on Earth. You'll find people where you won't find other species. They tend to be very climate specific. So, I don't, unless we have something like the Permian mass extinction, which could happen if the fall-to-cloth rates go. I mean, that was the video that Leo DiCaprio and I did that you can find on YouTube. But that's the most extreme situation. Unless we hit something like that, it's going to get tough. But I think humanity is going to soldier through, and we're going to need the equivalent of kind of founding fathers as for a new era.
Some say, and I've heard this since I was in college, and I'm about your age, that humans are overly adaptable.
Yeah, I don't. Overly, I suppose, is a judgment call, but we're hyper adaptable. I'll leave it at that. Katie, I got to run. Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Libya and the Global Enduring Disorder by Jason Pack. And this is from the preface titled Welcome to the Enduring Disorder. Today's international system is like a ship adrift during a pandemic. With the captain lost to the virus and the most capable and conscientious members of the crew self-isolating in their cabins, the deck is now teeming with contagious megalomaniacs. Rather than collaborate, each thinks he knows how to steer the ship better than the admirals. As the winds pick up, a fight breaks out among those scrambling to infiltrate the bridge. When the winners emerge from this melee and they reach the captain's chair, some choose to deliberately steer into the choppiest waters, each clutching the steering wheel until a competitor bursts in behind them and ejects them from the hot seat. As the vessel craters from stem to stern, those with fainter constitutions or a greater respect for the competency hierarchy have simply chosen to retire to their cabins. Will the crew eventually reemerge from their quarters to put the technocrats back in charge? Might the most reckless passenger subjugate the others? lock the convalescent crew members in their quarters, and emerge as the new de facto captain? Or should some sort of self-sustaining equilibrium have been reached with the vessel zigging and zagging indefinitely, neither capsizing nor reaching port? From my vantage point, watching U.S. policy toward Libya veer this way and that over the years, the events of the spring and summer of 2019 stood out as a high watermark of chaos and contradiction, with a multiplicity of relevant actors vying for prominence. They were also representative, in microcosm, of larger global trends. Witnessing them led me to question my assumptions about the West's future role in the world and the fundamental principles underpinning the international system. It was dawning on me that the contemporary ship of state had become permanently unmoored, careening back and forth due to contradictory decisions undertaken by ill-coordinated power centers. Plato envisioned such a scenario in The Republic. He warned that true democracy would lead to populism. Contempt for experts would ensue, eventually culminating in short-sighted and reversal-prone approaches to policy formation. He also warned that once this point was reached, it would be nearly impossible to put the genie back in the bottle. Over the past few years, my day-to-day experience of the foreign policy-making process in Washington, London, and Tunis, and the resulting outcomes in Libya, seemed to be embodying Plato's forecasts. In keeping with this observation, this book proposes that the international system has exited the post-Cold War period with its well-established features and dynamics and entered a new historical epoch termed the enduring disorder. This new historical period, which remains under-researched, is characterized by its own structures, trends, and interactions. They are not scientific laws that can be definitely discovered through experimentation, but rather patterns and trend lines that may be intuited from lived experience. My main contentions about our historical moment are interrelated. One, that the international system's interaction with Libya is an ideal arena to describe the key features of this new historical era, but that study of the Syrian, Yemeni, Venezuelan, or Ukrainian microcosms would likely work as well. And two, that the enduring disorder will long outlast the specific sequence of events set in motion by former American President Donald Trump or any given Libyan warlord. My analysis is that their emergence on the world stage was merely symptomatic of the enduring disorder, not its root cause. Actually, it is the enduring disorder that has given rise to Trump, Brexit, and the unique trajectories of state implosion that have befallen Libya, Yemen, and Syria. On the ground in Libya in May of 2019, the latest round of civil war had settled into an uneasy stalemate. Economic activity was stymied. The water and electricity grids were periodically shut down by the combatants. Civilian casualties mounted, and international peacemaking efforts had ground to a halt. The previously bustling southern suburbs of Tripoli were now crisscrossed by the ebb and flow of tanks and technicals. A parallel war of maneuver was also unfolding on the banks of the Potomac. The allies of President Trump sought to outflank the permanent institutions of the U.S. government in the tussle to shape American policy toward Libya's perpetual conflict. This was yet another skirmish between familiar adversaries. In the prior battles between Team Trump and U.S. institutions that set various aspects of Russia, Ukraine, and the Middle Eastern policy, each side had already demonstrated its unique strengths and weaknesses. This dynamic of Team Trump versus the institutions would become intimately familiar to all Americans during the tug of war to set the governmental response to the COVID pandemic. So what were the relative tactics of the adversaries? Trump's Twitter bravado was highly effective at manipulating the media, but usually quite impotent at formally changing entrenched U.S. government policies. Was the president actually trying to change American policy, but exhibiting a lack of understanding of the tools open to the executive branch? Or was he achieving his aim simply by stirring confusion, creating uncertainty, and preventing coherent coordination with America's allies? The book Libya and the Global Enduring Disorder by Jason Back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. A couple of quick stories for you, and then back to your calls here on Anything Goes Friday. Move over George Santos. First, it was George Santos. Then it was Anna Paulina Luna, who turned out that she had faked a whole bunch of stuff. What's with these Republican members of the House? These are all newly elected members of the Republican House of Representatives who completely lied to their voters in order to get into office. Of course, Republicans routinely lie, oh, we don't want to hurt Social Security. We love Social Security, right? It's the oldest scam in the book, I guess, and so it shouldn't, I suppose, surprise us. But in fact, let me just see here if I can Control O and Social Security. Maybe I've got, maybe not. I don't know. Nope. Never mind. I was going to play an FDR clip for you, but I can't easily and quickly find it. Anyhow, so now there's a third Republican. This is Congressman Andy Ogles. Seriously, what a tough name to grow up with. O-G-L-E-S. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. And he's a freshman from Tennessee, Middle Tennessee. And he claims that he's an economist, and he's, in fact, a healthcare economist, and he knows how to fix the country. And he said that he graduated from Middle Tennessee State University with a degree in economics. And so Channel 5 went to Tennessee State University and said, really? And they said, nope, not so much. What's with these people? Okay, number one. Number two. Imagine this. This guy is, his name is Dan Berger, and he has he has what my brother had. He has this kind of systemic rheumatoid arthritis, that hurts your whole body, and the way that you suppress it, and the way that my brother Stan did, my brother who passed away last year, suppressed it, is by taking this drug. In fact, it's one of the drugs that they want to outlaw for abortions, but it also slightly suppresses your immune system, so it slows down, because rheumatoid, this kind of arthritis is your body attacking itself, so it slows that down, right? So he's taking a drug that's essentially an immunosuppressant, and he had to travel to South America, and he's all up to date on his COVID shots, but he wanted to get, one last booster. His doctor had said, please do this. And so he schedules an appointment at the Rite Aid on Vista Avenue in Boise, Idaho. And about an hour before he goes, he looks at his phone at the app, and it says his appointment's been canceled. But he sees there's 9 more appointments that day, so he makes one for an hour later. Shows up an hour later and says, I'm here for my shot. And the pharmacist, a woman named Anna, says, I'm not going to give you the shot. I'm a conscientious objector. I'll give you a flu shot, but I don't believe in the COVID shots. What kind of fool allows somebody like this to work in a pharmacy? I mean, it's just breathtaking. So anyhow, he contacts. First of all, he puts it on social media, and so the newspaper, this local newspaper, reaches in Omaha, reaches out to Rite Aid, and Terry Hickey, director of public relations at Rite Aid, told the Statesman, the Oklahoma Statesman, she would not answer questions by phone, but would take them by email. But then when they sent the director of public relations at Rite Aid an email about why do you have somebody working giving shots who refuses to give shots, they declined to answer the email too. Then they asked, is Amy, the pharmacist, still employed by Rite Aid? No, we're not going to answer that one either. So finally, he got his booster. He just went down the street and around the block to Albertson's pharmacy, and he said it was a great experience. But I'm just like, why do we tolerate this kind of insanity? Why does Rite Aid tolerate this kind of insanity? I'm telling you, until I hear that Rite Aid has done something about this, I'm not going to walk into one of those stores. Another piece of legislation, about how crazy all this stuff is. In Idaho, It's a new idiotic Idaho bill. This is House Bill number 154. And I'm sorry, I don't have the name of the legislator who introduced it. It's not listed on the what I have here, which is off In It to Win It's post over at Democratic Underground. But the bill, House Bill 154 by the Health and Welfare Committee of the state of Idaho, would make it a crime to administer a vaccine, provide or administer a vaccine developed using messenger ribonucleic acid technology in any individual or any other mammal in this state. mRNA vaccines. They want to outlaw them and make it a crime to give somebody a COVID shot. I'm telling you, these people are just plain old flat out nuts. And then to compound things, just listen to this. I mean, we've talked about how the Senate is like, the place where good legislation goes to die, but it's not just that. 43 million more Americans voted for Democrats for the United States Senate last year than voted for Republicans. Now, we do have a one-vote majority in the Senate, but it should be much larger than that. If 43 million Americans more voted for Democrats than Republicans. It turns out, and this is, you can read this over at Daily Kos, our new data shows just how out of whack the Senate is the headline. So, and I'll just quote from it, from this story. Senate Republicans lost more votes than Democrats in 1988, but have won the chamber half the time since 2000 anyway. Republicans still represent more Americans than Democrats in 1996, but still won the Senate in 7 of the next 13 elections, and it could get worse after 2024. 5 of the 6 conservative justices on the U.S. Supreme Court were confirmed by Senates where the GOP majority was elected with fewer votes than the Democrats. These justices have restricted abortion rights, shredded voting rights, and preserved Republican gerrymanders. And this, and by the way, we would have fixed this last year by introducing, by recognizing Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico as states. But Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, and of course every single Republican in the Senate, blew it up. Thanks a lot, Kyrsten. Thanks a lot, Joe. Asses. I mean, forgive me. I'm so disgusted by this whole entire thing. Okay, and last story, and then I'll pick up your phone calls. We've got this great geeky science story. This is a new study that came out of the University of California at San Diego. It came out of the Herbert Wertheim School of Public Health and Human Longevity Science. It was published in the peer-reviewed journal Alzheimer's and Dementia, the Journal of the Alzheimer's Association. This was done on women 65 years of age and over, so this isn't one of those studies where they start with young people and see what helps prevent dementia. This started with people 65, women specifically. Women are at greater risk for dementia than men. What they found was each additional 31 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical exercise per day, 31 minutes, and this can be a brisk walk, was associated with a 21% lower risk of developing mild cognitive impairment or dementia. Additionally, each 1,865 daily steps was associated with a 33% reduced risk after that first 31 minutes. They say physical activity has now been identified as the top one of the 3 most promising ways to reduce the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So let me tell you, if you are over 50 and you are not walking a couple of miles every day, religiously doing it and walking fast enough that you can get yourself right up on the edge of getting out of breath from time to time, start now. Please, this is important stuff. When you call into the program, I'd like you to be sharp. All righty, my call screen software here tells me that I've got a couple of people who have figured out my, can I power my house with a $15 solution instead of a $15,000 solution? I'm looking forward to hearing that. And we'll get to your calls also on all other things. It is, after all, Anything Goes Friday, and we will be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the place where smart people get their news. Stick around. And welcome back, Kurt. Akron, Ohio. Hey, Kurt. I've been to Akron, Ohio. I should know how to pronounce it. How are you? What's up?
You've been to Akron. What'd you do in Akron?
I drove through, but I've been there.
And you smelled the rubber.
I don't recall that. I do recall stopping at a restaurant there, but I can't tell you what it was. I mean, this was 40 or more years ago, but I was always
cool.
Curious about Akron when I was growing up.
Well, there you go. Well, anyway, first of all, congratulations on the design of your new book cover. I saw it on Amazon today, and I pre-ordered.
Oh, really? They've got it up on Amazon, the Hidden History of American Democracy.
Yes, they do, and I will be getting mine on the 20th of July.
How cool. It'll probably come out a couple weeks before that. They usually do.
Right. Well, anyway, the reason I called is there was a gentleman who called the other day about his girlfriend getting shot at the University of Texas back in 1966 and how he had to identify her at the hospital. Mm-hmm. I actually know a woman who was a student at Kent State University back in 1970, and she was actually friends with Sandy Scheuer, one of the girls that got shot and killed.
Oh, my.
That day. And Karen, let's call her Karen, was legally blind and couldn't drive, and she was from Youngstown, just as Sandy Scheuer was. And Sandy would drop her off and pick her up from Youngstown to Kent on vacations and long weekends and everything. Just very nice to Karen to accommodate her.
Yeah.
Well, the day of the rally, Karen ran into Sandy and tried to talk Sandy into going to the rally with her. And Sandy Scheuer says, I'm not really into politics. I'm against the war, blah, blah, blah. I really need to go to class and proofread a paper. Excuse me. But we can meet later for dinner, and you can tell me all about it. Okay, Sandy, goodbye. Okay, Karen, goodbye. Karen walks towards the rally. Sandy walks towards Prentice Hall. That was the last conversation they ever had. To this day, that still haunts this woman.
I can imagine. By the way, a little-known bit of trivia, but it's easily documented. I've written about it several times if you're ever looking for a hot link for it. 3 days before the Kent State massacre, Ronald Reagan said, if it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with.
It's in your book.
Yeah.
It's actually in your book, The Hidden History of Guns.
Yeah, I know.
And then also, the day after, he said something about Kent State as well.
Called them brats.
It has to have it. All the brats, and, I'm closing down California state colleges right now. And, it's just unbelievable. And, of course, that 3 days before the Kent State shooting, too, Nixon went to the Pentagon and said, you got these bums who are on the campus burning the books, and these boys over there fighting in the war, they're the greatest Americans who ever lived. And, he divided the country into bums and great Americans. That's your classic tribalism.
Yeah. Yeah, and demagoguery. I mean,
and demagoguery, that's a better word.
Nixon and Reagan were both so good at that, and so is Trump. I mean, these guys actually do have a skill set. It's not one that's particularly useful to society, but they're quite good at it.
But it sure inflames and gets people talking, doesn't it?
It does, which is exactly what they want. And DeSantis is doing it now.
But I just thought I'd share that story about Sandy Scheuer and a connection that I have to kind of compound onto that gentleman who called the other day about the shooting at Texas.
Well, thank you, Kurt. We need to remember these people. It is important to hold them in our memory.
And if you have them around, consider them a resource.
There you go. Thank you, Kurt. Talking to you. And thanks for checking out my book. I appreciate it. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Just some amazing stuff going on over on Fox News. Megan Lapp and David Stevenson have been regular guests across Fox News, and they're claiming to be all worried about whales, all these whales that are dying off the east coast of the United States, arguing that these are the result of the windmills that are out there, right? The ocean wind and the work done to install them. Well, it turns out that Lapp works for an organization whose largest donor is Charles Koch. whose largest donor is the Texas Public Policy Foundation that gets their money from Charles Koch. And Stevenson works for a group whose largest donor, the Caesar Rodney Institute, is the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers. So if you have friends who are watching Fox News and they're concerned about the whales, you might want to let them know what's going on. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Hang on just a second. I just have to find, I want to see if I can find this. Yeah, here it is. I think this is it. Let's see if I've got the right clip here. Sean, can you play audio out of my computer? I was speaking earlier about, we've got now 3 Republican members of the House who lied to get into the House of Representatives, and this is what FDR said back in the day about this kind of thing.
Let me warn you, and let me warn the nation against the smooth evasion that says, of course we believe these things. We believe in Social Security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes. Cross our hearts and hope to die. We believe in all these things. But we do not like the way the present administration is doing them. Just turn them over to us. We will do all of them. We will do more of them. We will do them better. And most important of all, the doing of them will not cost anybody anything.
It's Nikki Haley, right? Mike Pence came out yesterday. Yeah, we need to do away with the New Deal. I've got a better deal. Right. Oh, man. All righty. Mike in DeLand, Florida. Am I saying that right, Mike? Says you got an answer to my electrical question?
Yes. Yeah, you're absolutely right with what you want to do.
Oh, really?
But the only thing
I can
is
just turn off the mains and back feed through the house.
Yeah, you got to make sure the main's off and do not turn that main back on. But the only thing you're going to have is one leg of your panel.
Oh,
so
that's right.
That's
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you got to feed through a dryer is normally how you do it off a generator. You plug it into a dryer and it feeds the whole panel.
Because it's 220, and so you're feeding both sides of the panel.
Exactly. You only feed one side of the panel, whatever panel that plug goes to. Now, if you jump to another plug off the other leg of the panel, you'd have it.
Right. So what I have to do then is figure out, and I can do it just by looking at each one of the breakers, is figure out what in the house will be hot, because it'll just be the stuff on that side of the panel. Now, do you know if I can feed backwards through a GFI breaker? Because there is a GFI breaker.
I don't believe it hurts a GFI at all. I really don't believe it. I know you need a neutral for GFI.
Right. So the GFI is
neutral.
It's not looking at the direction of the electric flow. It's looking at whether it's balanced against ground. Right. That's
exactly. It doesn't matter if it feeds either way. It feeds either way. Yep. Exactly right.
Well, Mike,
so you're right with what you're after.
You just saved me $10,000. Thank you.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I watch you all the time. You're great.
Thank you very much. Good talking to you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. You have a good day.
You too. Cliff in Santa Clarita, California. Hey, Cliff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I'm great, but I'll get better.
Good on you. What's up?
And George Bush and Dick Cheney are still war criminals.
Yes, amen.
And I don't want anyone to ever forget that. And God bless Elizabeth Warren for calling out both sides, including Chuck Schumer, on their inaction regarding monopolies.
Yeah, I'm with you.
If you're aware of what I'm talking. And Mike Pence he's just pathetic, Tom. He's delusional. He has absolutely no lane.
Yeah, this guy has no political future. I mean,
No, he's done. He's toast. Yeah. Anyways, I came across an article the other day regarding the superbug strains of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. They're calling them antimicrobial resistance.
Right.
And the WHO is saying it's one of the top global health threats for the near term, and the UN's calling it a silent pandemic.
It's what killed my niece last week.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so apparently they call them AMRs, but they're in the waters around the globe, including the Colorado and the Ganges. And, they're sources of drinking water, so you could recognize this problem. But the bottom line, Tom, is these antibiotics may no longer work to fight the very infections they were designed to treat. And they're predicting millions of deaths in the next couple decades. I just want to, what say you about this?
I'm very familiar. Like I said, this is what killed my niece. They didn't use the most. There are some of them are still vulnerable to like vancomycin, to the very, very top end, very expensive, very powerful antibiotics. But the cause of this is not overuse of antibiotics in humans. Most of the antibiotics sold in the United States are injected into animals, into factory farm animals, and they use them to fatten them up. And that's where these antibiotic-resistant bugs are coming from. And what happened with my niece was for 5-6 days they gave her the weaker antibiotics because they thought they'd work their way up, which is the protocol that they usually use to try to avoid resistance. And by the time, they figured out what was going on, it was too late. It had gone systemic and it killed her. And I think it's malpractice, frankly. But Cliff, thank you for the call. Yeah, spot on. We need to be doing something about this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
In fact, in the science magazines that I subscribe to, this is one of the big things is, they're looking for whole new classes of antibiotics.
It's a collection of essays. This one is by David Gilbert on page 31, titled "The System Within the System, the Prison Industrial Complex and Imperialism." For those of us held behind locked gates within the walls and fences topped with razor wire, the corrections regime is the system that works tirelessly to impose total control over every aspect of our lives. Yet as ponderous and powerful as prisons are, they're only one part, a central girder, of a much bigger and more foreboding house of horrors, which can most accurately be named imperialism. The structural needs of the larger edifice set the specifications for the size and position of the girder. The strength of the girder helps determine how long the building itself will stand. We can't understand the explosion of imprisonment in the United States since 1971 without looking at an imperialism's urgent needs and goals of that period. By the same token, we can't develop an effective program around the prison industrial complex without grappling with the stresses and trends of the larger system of imperial rule. To be clear, before you take time to read this chapter, I don't offer any brilliant ideas on strategy. Those will most likely emerge from the organizing and activist efforts themselves. However, some of the concerns discussed may raise questions that go into forming strategy. I definitely look forward to learning from the dialogues that this generates on these issues. Imperialism may sound like the kind of rhetoric we want to avoid, but it's one word that needs to be rescued as the best way to name the system that rules over us. The basis of imperialism is the relentless quest for profits around the globe. Its most striking characteristic is the colossal and grotesque polarization of wealth. That polarization happens between nations, between the rich countries of the North and the impoverished ones of the global South, the impoverished countries of Africa, Latin America, and parts of Asia, and at the same time within each country based on class, race, and gender. The poles of dazzling wealth and abject poverty are intimately linked, as the former results from the ruthless plunder of the latter. This system is built on and intensifies all the major forms of oppression: patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy, all of which are structurally central. At the same time, imperialism highlights the global character of the system in a way that explains why the most intense oppression and resistance have been in the South, and that also provides the context for why the liberation struggles of the various people of color have been in the forefront within the U.S. There's no way to capture what the system costs in human life and potential, the pain and loss for all of us. Close to 1 billion human beings suffer chronic hunger, while another 2 billion face nutritional deficiencies. 1 billion lack access to clean drinking water. Just looking at children under the age of 5, imperialism is a holocaust in progress. Over 9 million die every year from easily preventable causes associated with poverty. The price for future generations may be even more severe as the rapaciousness of this global frenzy for profits
threatens the very ecological basis for sustaining human life on any scale on our planet. Since most people won't accept living in squalor amid plenty, imperialism entails both the most sophisticated and the most brutal forms of social control. Its most salient feature is war, war after war after war, mainly against the peoples of the South. The domestic front line of such repression is a truly violent and harmful prison industrial complex. Today, 2,300,000 people are held behind bars, about 7 times the number in 1971. That explosion was unprecedented, coming after a 70-year period when the rates of imprisonment had remained more or less constant. This dramatic change did not result from some sudden skyrocketing of criminal activity, but rather from a radical expansion of what was designated as a crime and a draconian increase in the punishments for those crimes. Such extreme measures were driven by considerations way beyond criminal justice and often at cross purposes to the proclaimed goal of public safety. These destructive changes were born from crisis, one much more severe and protracted than the periodic ups and downs of the business cycles that occur over a roughly 10-year period, but rather a situation that threatened the very survival of the system. Such structural crises occur because capitalism is by its nature unstable. The economy is vast and complicated, but the major decisions are made by a tiny corporate and financial elite, with each thinking only of his own profits. When a structural crisis develops, the long-term institutional arrangements that assured a reliable flow of profits and the rule of capital no longer function. One dramatic example was the Great Depression of the 1930s, followed by World War II. At the end of that period, a new set of international institutions, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, were created. At the same time, a new deal was hammered out for the terms of the bargain between capital and labor within the U.S. Those arrangements worked well for capital until they broke down a generation later. That new structural crisis, which emerged between 1968 and 73, is the seedbed for the burgeoning of the prison industrial complex and many related changes in U.S. history. The first and most obvious signs were political, as the resistance to imperialism crested in 1968. Abolition now. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. One of the things that has always baffled me is why, after the Mueller report found, after the Mueller investigation found that there were 10 explicit prosecutable cases of Donald Trump committing violations of the law by obstructing justice, that when Merrick Garland came into office, he chose to ignore those. And now I think the statute of limitations has run out on them. I believe it was a 5-year statute of limitations. He had that first year, he could have prosecuted those. Why? Why is it that on October 30th, 2016, Harry Reid, then the head of the Senate Democrats and of the Senate, wrote a letter to Jim Comey saying it's clear that you have in your possession information about the connection between Trump and Russia and are refusing to release it. Yet you rushed out this information that you were going to investigate Hillary Clinton, and there was no there. Why is this? There's a video with the entire letter from Harry Reid over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 35 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Charles in Centerville, Illinois. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind?
Hey, I got 2 issues. I got one safety issue for your electrical issue.
Okay.
The first one is the derailment. My dad worked for the railroad for 45 years, and my best friend retired after about 40 years from the railroad.
Uh-huh.
Back in the day, they had a carman, a fireman, a conductor, and an engineer, and a switchman. Now, and they did away with the cabooses. Mm-hmm. Now they have a conductor and an engineer that ride together in the engine.
Right.
So the caboose, the conductor in the caboose could always look toward the front of the train and see, watch for anything that was peculiar, see any smoke or anything. So that was the safety precaution.
This
so
is
they
before mile-long trains.
Yeah. And the carman, after the train was stopped, he would walk the line and check the cars. But they did away with all that because they didn't want to pay the money.
Yeah. I'm assuming there's a technology thing, too, that probably there's a camera in the front and a camera in the back, and people can look around and see what's going on, but maybe not.
Yeah, they have an attachment on the last car that takes care of some of that. But the payload, that vinyl chloride, I worked with it for many, many years. We had polyvinyl chloride that we put on our coil springs that we manufactured for Moog Automotive, and that stuff causes brain cancer.
Yeah, I've heard.
Amongst other
and
things.
liver cancer too. I know.
Oh yeah. It doesn't take long either. On your electrical issue, Generac wanted to charge me $10,000. So what I did was, we lost our electricity. I live in Centerville, which 3 years ago was the poorest city in the nation. So for $700, I bought a generator, and I put. Luckily, I have a basement, and I put receptacles in my basement. So all I do is when I lose my power is plug I switch from my connections downstairs from my house connection to my generator. Problem solved. The only thing is that you don't forget to have surge protectors on your items in your home. And that's about it.
Yeah. Okay.
Don't see when the power comes on. When the power comes on from the power companies, it's a surge. That's and it goes way above 115 volts. And then it comes down automatically.
Right.
But your surge will destroy everything.
Yeah.
So that's the only problem you'll have.
Okay, and then, of course, if you're going to have a generator in your basement, you want to make sure that it's vented to the outside because you don't want to die of carbon dioxide.
It's out in my garage.
Oh, okay.
And I just
that works then. Yeah.
Piped outside. Yeah. So good luck.
Thank you.
And one other thing, you can't. It's got to be coated, and mine's not coated.
Yeah, mine won't be either. So I probably shouldn't be talking about it on the radio, but
exactly.
I'm almost excited for the next time we lose power. We haven't lost power yet this winter, but the last 2 winters we were down for a day or two, and it's just no fun at all.
Don't talk about it on the. After today, don't talk about it on the air.
I won't
anymore.
Okay.
Hey, have a good one,
Charles. Thanks. You too. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind?
Well, I discovered something really interesting I thought you may find interesting, that it has to do with politics, grift, and game shows, oddly enough.
All right.
The guy's name is Ralph Andrews, and he's known for the shows You Don't Say, Liars Club, and Celebrity Sweepstakes. But he was very big in California politics. And what he did was he was being with Ronald Reagan and hired his adopted son to host a show called Lingo in 1987. Well, turns out Ralph never paid him, so he walked off the show. And then a year after, Ralph got grifted by 2 of his own staffers on another show they did in Atlantic City. And one of those people was Larry Hovis from, what was that show from the 1960s? Larry Hovis was on, just lost the name of it. Oh, Hogan's Heroes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was really, in fact, they had to call in the game control board, and the show was so bad, it was based on Yahtzee. It was so bad that it never got carried in New York or Philadelphia.
Fascinating.
It was only Atlantic City, and but yet they called in the police on Barry Hovers and this other person from being a guy who was a grifter, and he got grifted.
Yeah.
Amazing.
That is amazing. And Reagan's connection to, grifting is not something that's unique to politics, that's for sure. Sean,
no,
thank
I know.
you.
But I did that I'd see in the game show world, too. But it's really, it's fascinating when I read it. I'm like, I got to tell Tom about this because I thought he'd find this fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good one. Sean, thank you. Thank you so much. Larry in Los Angeles. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hey, just a quick thought about the monkey study that you were talking about.
Yeah.
If you've heard of hypersensitive or supersensitive people,
sure.
They find that that's also true in the animal world, and these people don't like loud noises, and they tend to what some people call the introverts. But it turns out that if that description you had, the monkeys moving away from the center of the troop, they may have been hypersensitive. They move away from the troop, and they're very sensitive to noise also.
Yeah.
They're the early warning system for the whole tribe.
Yep, makes sense.
And that's why the tribe dies.
Yep, absolutely.
But in talking about the that, I'd also talk to you about NBER, and so they also give studies on critical race problems regarding our economy, and as to why minorities do worse in America than the rest of the.
Now, this is the National something on Economic Research?
National Bureau of Economic Research.
National
Bureau of Economic Research. So Florida might want to ban that, the writings of that group also, because they talk about the how it is that America's racism is hurting minorities.
Wow.
But getting into what the Fed is doing, Biden's economy. What he's doing is he's doing quantitative tightening. And I have described quantitative easing as being fascism. Quantitative tightening you might describe as being feudalism, or sort of a monarch feudalism system. But the Fed is the king.
Well, isn't it an easier way to describe it, Larry, that during the Trump administration, they were doing quantitative easing, which was, they were buying bonds and basically goosing the stock and bond markets. And then as soon as Biden comes in, they start selling those bonds and damaging the stock and bond markets. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. So what they're doing now, the Fed started off by selling $47 billion per month. And then they upped it in September to $95 billion per month. And then when the stock market still was trying to climb again, this last month, I just looked it up, they sold $105 billion. And
sure enough, the market's down.
The market's going down now.
Yeah.
And I still can't find out what assets the Fed is buying regarding the corporate assets, because I'm suspecting that all those companies that announced that they were going to be laying off people, they got a heads up that, hey, all of a sudden, all that cash that was being influxed into our coffers is no longer going to be there. And they started announcing that, and that's why everybody's also announcing we're going to have a recession when we're not. But they're getting their talking points from the Fed. The Fed has become a political animal.
I agree.
And it is doing nothing. And if you look at the history of it, in my lifetime of 69 years, the Fed has always increased the Fed rate when a Democratic administration was in office, and it's always, without exception, dropped it when a Republican administration was in the White House. Now they have quantitative easing that they can play with also, because the Fed rate was killing the Democratic economies fast enough. So now they've got the Fed rate, and they're doubling down on it with the quantitative easing.
Right. In other words, dumping stocks and bonds.
Right. And so when you sit back and look at what's happening, and everybody on these economic programs are acting like, gee, we don't understand what's happening. We don't know why the markets and why everything's happening this way. They never talk about what the Fed is doing as far as they're selling all of these assets that they built up when Donald Trump was president.
You're right. You're right.
And if they talked about that, then everybody would get a good understanding of it. Instead, what they did last year, they were talking about cash is trash at the beginning of last year, right around the time when the Fed was saying it's going to increase the Fed rate. Now, it used to be in the past, every time the Fed was about to do something like that, they would warn the investors, don't fight the Fed. They didn't start saying don't fight the Fed until about a month and a half ago. Waited till the Fed did its dirt, and then the stocks all crashed, and it turns out that cash was not trash, but cash was golden.
Yeah.
And since Biden has been president, gold has basically flatlined. The stock market still has gone up a little bit, and the value of the dollar has gone up. And every time the value of the dollar is going up, that means the Fed is...
You mean internationally, because the value of the dollar domestically is going down as a result of inflation.
You can say that, but since the value, if you're buying a product from overseas,
right,
you're still paying less for that product. And
yeah,
so
that's what I meant. Relative to other currencies, the dollar's going up, but relative to itself, the dollar's going down because that's what inflation is.
Yeah, that's true. But when you look at the fact that the dollar is going, the dollar is actually going up, and it has been going up. It went down when Donald Trump was president because the Fed was just printing a lot of cash.
Right, and thus imports were cheaper.
Cash. Right, and the Fed is no longer printing all that cash. So when you look at the value of the dollar, if you go on the internet and look at it, it has gone up since Biden has been president. And it went down recently in the last 3 months, but it's still higher than it was when Biden took office. And that's because the Fed has this policy where they always make sure the dollar is weaker when a Republican is president because they think that means that our exports will be cheaper for the rest of the world to buy. Right. And then when a Democratic president becomes president, they make they basically cause the economy to grow a little bit weak on currency. So there are fewer dollars in the economy when a Democratic president is in the White House, and therefore the Democrat has a rougher time, even though they still outperform the Republicans.
Yep, I'm with you, Larry. I'm with you, and you explained it so well, as you always do. And I so appreciate your calls. Larry, thank you. And wish you a great weekend here. It's 47 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back with more of your calls here on Anything Goes Friday, right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Talk media for the sane among us. Yes, we're still here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Tim in Jackson, Wyoming. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, Jackson, Wyoming. Ground zero for income inequality in the United States.
Really?
Hey, oh, yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. You got a lot of billionaires with vacation homes there, right?
Yeah, a lot of billionaires. Yeah, a lot of secondary homes. It's, an average one-bedroom apartment here. Actually, I'm sorry, an average studio. You don't even get a bedroom. An average studio apartment here runs about $2,700 a month. Wow. Yeah, and we have we're a tourist town, so our year-round population is only about 10,000 people. So not many of us can afford that kind of rent. But anyhow, that's not why I called. I wanted to share with you something that happened to me this week. I bought a new Roku. I replaced my Fire Stick, my Amazon Fire Stick, with a Roku, and I was going through setting it up, and the Roku, these things will give you recommended channels, recommended apps, things like that, right? So on the Roku, under the recommended news and opinion apps, every single one of them is extreme right wing. Talking Charlie Kirk, Newsmax, OAN, Blaze TV, Bill O'Reilly, Daily Wire, and Fox News.
Oh my God.
Free Speech TV is nowhere to be found.
Well, there's a reason for that, Tim.
Okay, why? What is that?
Yeah, the reason is not that Roku is institutionally right-wing, although that may be the case. The reason is that those recommendations typically are paid for. Just like, you can pay Amazon, or you can pay Google so that when somebody searches on, Tim from Jackson, Wyoming, your website will be the first thing that comes up if you pay them enough money. And so these right-wing television networks all have big money behind them. I mean, most of them are sponsored by or owned by or helped start by right-wing billionaires. They know which side their bread is buttered on. And so I don't know this for certain. I don't know the internal workings of Roku, but I would bet a lot of money that the reason that you're getting those right-wing recommendations is because every single one of those right-wing channels is giving Roku money.
Pumping a lot of money in.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
yeah.
a form of advertising, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense. I looked into the CEO of Roku, a guy named Anthony Wood. There's not a whole lot about him out there. Forbes gives him a philanthropy score of 1, so he's not giving away too much money. So I kind of assume.
Well, this goes back to my perennial rant about I want Free Speech TV to start promoting themselves and somebody at Free Speech TV. I don't know that they even have anybody who has this as a job responsibility. And if they do, they're not doing their job, because somebody should be contacting Roku and saying, send me a rate card. What do you guys charge to be on your recommended news list? We'd like to be number 1 on your recommended news list, or at least in the top 4. What will it cost? And not just Roku, by the way. I mean, all of the networks do the same thing. And I know that it's pay for play on others. So, it's just reasonable to assume it is on Roku as well. I mean, this is an industry that I've been in for a long time. This is how it works. So
I might suggest maybe changing the icon from SFTV to actually spelling out Free Speech TV, because that might get a few more people to click on it.
Or just free speech, yeah.
Maybe even some right-wingers.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. Tim, thanks a lot for the call.
Maybe we caught somebody's attention. Thanks, Tom.
There you go.
Right.
Thank you. Maybe there's a donor out there, I don't know, who'd want to give a donation specific for that. Help support progressive radio. If you're listening to us on a commercial station, call their advertisers and let them know you're listening. If you're listening to us on Pacifica, or one of our many nonprofit stations, please support them when they do their fundraising drives. Thanks for supporting Progressive Talk Radio, and tag you're it. Minutes past the hour. Tim in Shutesbury, Massachusetts. Am I saying it right, Tim?
That's right.
Hey, what's up?
Well, there's 2 things about the electrical connections you're proposing that could kill people.
Okay. Tell me what they are.
So, one, having a extension cord with that's double-ended male. And for the listeners, it follows, heterosexual sexual anatomy. Male is the plug that has the things that stick out. Female has the holes, something goes in.
And you can't even buy them because it's crazy. I mean, I had to buy a piece of wire and 2 male plugs, and I'm going to make one myself. So keep going.
Yeah. Well, that's called a death plug.
I know.
And the reason for it is somebody, that you will have the prong sticking out of it being energized.
That's correct. They'll be hot.
And somebody touches that, and you're like, okay, I know better. Well, one night you might not, or someone else touches it, or someone else uses it for something else. The other thing with these home-based hookups that can get people killed is when you get a solar hookup or a generator hookup, there's an interlock system that gets put onto your circuit breakers that will disconnect you from the grid.
Right.
And plugging your house in can backfeed into the grid, so the power goes out, you plug that in, now you've got electricity flowing into the lines coming into your house, and someone picks it up on the ground, or the electrical worker picks it up when he's been told or flip the disconnects.
Right, the grid
and your
is
house
down.
Isn't on the list as one of the things.
Yeah.
Then
that's why I prefaced the whole thing by saying I'm going to turn off the mains first. I mean, just killing that main breaker would solve that problem, wouldn't it?
Yes, there's reasons why they put a little interlock on that, and that's not hard to get. And then you could get a male plug that attaches in near the main breaker that feeds into that instead of feeding back into an outlet or something.
Right. But your point about the death plug is well taken. I hadn't considered it. So the way to do this would be to first plug the one male end into the house, because the house is dead and the mains are off. And so the other male end is not hot right now. And then I plug that into this adapter that I bought for my car. They sell them on Amazon for $50, and it's specific for the Ioniq 5. They have them for different brands, it just plugs into the car, and then you've got a 110 volt outlet there. And so then I would plug that into the car, and so that way I would not have a hot plug that I could accidentally touch, right?
As long as you're sure that your house is totally dead and things don't get turned on at the wrong point. But I'm just worried about your listeners thinking, hey, this sounds like a good idea. Everyone do a bit more research, and there's something out here specifically designed in a way that's safer, that's not going to cost you $10,000.
Okay.
But that will just keep these accidents from happening.
Is that, and thank you for saying that. This is, I should have put a caveat on this. Don't do this at home unless you have a background in electronics and you're willing to take the chance. And probably you shouldn't. But is what you're talking about basically, I mean, you know, I've got 100 amp surface, I've got 200 amp breakers, panels, right? And so I've got a 200 amp mains breaker. Are you suggesting that there's a 200 amp main breaker that has the ability to blow itself if it detects current backfeeding?
There may be, but there's also an interlock switch to plug this in, that will, switch from one to the other.
That's what I don't know what that means. I'll have to Google it. Right?
Well, yeah, and if anyone can go into your local, there's got to be a solar outfitter around somewhere and ask, what's this? And sometimes it's a mechanical thing. It fits on the front of your circuit breaker panel, and you can't flip one off without automatically having it turn the other off. So things don't backfeed, and then there's a special connection they'll have. So, you spend a couple $100. Right. But, find your local solar company and say, this is what I want to do. And they'll say, here's what you need. Cool. A couple $100 for the whole setup.
Yeah, because with solar, you got the same thing. I mean, you got power coming into your house. Tim, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days inbox, no ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Hi, for our book club today, we're reading from Bernie Sanders' new book, Where We Go From Here, 2 Years in the Resistance. This is from the introduction. During my campaign for president in 2016, I stated over and over again that the future of our country was dependent upon our willingness to make a political revolution. I stressed that real change never occurs from the top down. It always happens from the bottom up. No real change in American history, not the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, the environmental movement, or any other movement for social justice has ever succeeded without grassroots activism, without millions of people engaged in the struggle for justice. That's what I said when I ran for president. That's what I believe now. That's what I've been working to accomplish over the last several years. At a time of massive and growing income and wealth inequality, as our nation moves closer and closer to an oligarchic form of society, we need an unprecedented grassroots political movement to stand up to the greed of the billionaire class and the politicians they own. And the good news is we're making progress. People in every region of our country are standing up and fighting back against the most dishonest and reactionary president in the history of the republic. In state after state, they're also taking on establishment politicians who are more concerned about protecting their wealthy campaign contributors than they are with the needs of the middle class and the working people they're supposed to represent. We're making progress when millions of people in every state in the country take to the streets for the Women's March in opposition to Trump's reactionary agenda. We're making progress when an unprecedented grassroots movement elects a young African American as mayor of Birmingham, Alabama. We're making progress when tens of thousands of Americans turn out at rallies and town hall meetings to successfully oppose the Republican effort to throw 32 million people off health insurance. We're making progress when governors and local officials announce in response to student demands tuition-free public colleges and universities. We're making progress when over the past 2 years, hundreds of first-time candidates of every conceivable background run for school board, city council, state legislature, and Congress, and many of them win. The good news is that the American people are far more united than the media would like us to believe. They get it. They know that over the past 40 years, despite a huge increase in worker productivity, the middle class has continued to shrink while the very rich have become very much richer. They know that for the first time in the modern history of the United States, our kids will likely have a lower living standard than us. The bad news is that instead of going forward together, demagogues like Trump win elections by dividing us. The bad news is that too many of us are getting angry at the wrong people. I was not an immigrant picking strawberries it was not an immigrant picking strawberries at $8 an hour who destroyed the economy in 2008. It was the greed and illegal behavior of Wall Street. It was not transgender people who threw millions of workers out on the street as factories were shut down all across the country. It was profitable multinational corporations in search of cheap labor abroad. Our job, for the sake of our kids and grandchildren, is to bring our people together around a progressive agenda. Are the majority of people in our country deeply concerned about the grotesque level of income and wealth inequality that we are experiencing? You bet they are. Do they believe that our campaign finance system is corrupt and enables the rich to buy elections? Overwhelmingly they do. Do they want to raise the minimum wage to a living wage and provide pay equity for women? Yes, they do. Do they think that the very rich and large corporations should pay more in taxes so that all of our kids can have free tuition at public universities and colleges? Yep. Do they believe that the United States should join every other major country and guarantee health care as a right? Yes, again. Do they believe climate change is real? You got to be kidding. Are they tired of the United States of America, the wealthiest country in the history of the world, falling apart at the seams with roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rails, levees, and dams either failing or at risk of failing? Who isn't? Further, a majority of the American people want comprehensive immigration reform and a criminal justice system that is based on justice, not racism or mass incarceration. Today, what the American people want is not what they're getting. In fact, under Republican leadership in the House, Senate, and White House, they are getting exactly the opposite of what they want. The American people want a government that represents all of us. Instead, they're getting a government that represents the interests and extremist ideology of wealthy campaign contributors. They want environmental policies that combat climate change and pollution and that will allow our kids to live on a healthy and habitable planet. Instead, they're getting executive orders and legislation that push more fossil fuel production, more greenhouse gas emissions, and more pollution. They want a foreign policy that prioritizes peacemaking. Instead, they're getting increased military spending and growing hostility to our long-term democratic allies. They want a nation in which all people are treated with dignity and respect and where we continue our decades-long struggle to end discrimination based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and nation of origin. Instead, they have a president who seeks to win political support by appealing to those very deep-seated prejudices. During the last several years, I've worked hard in Washington, but I've also traveled to 32 states in every region of our country. I've seen the beauty, strength, and courage of our people. I've also seen fear and despair. I've talked to people with life-threatening illnesses in West Virginia who worry about what will happen to them or their loved ones if they lose the health insurance that keeps them alive. I've talked to young immigrants, dreamers in Arizona who are frightened to death about losing their legal status and being deported from the only country they have ever known. I talked to a young single mom in Nevada worried about how she can raise her daughter on $10.45 an hour. I talked to retirees and older workers in Kansas who are outraged that as a result of congressional legislation, they could lose up to 60% of the pensions they paid into and were promised as deferred compensation for a lifetime of hard work.
Bernie Sanders, where we go from here. Fascists, neo-fascists, whatever you want to call them. Sadly, it's looking like this is the case in a lot of Republican, my dad's Republican Party, guys that he knew back in the day, and a lot of them have passed away now too, but they've just got to be just in pain. I mean, there's a piece over at rawstory.com. It's titled "Like a Coup, Michigan Republicans Raise Alarms at Militant Far-Right Takeover." Moderate Republicans in Michigan are growing increasingly alarmed at the far-right members of their party who are making major inroads in taking over the entire statewide party using methods including armed intimidation at Republican events. These guys aren't, just showing up with guns at drag shows. They're showing up with guns at Republican meetings. The report states, this is from the party, is an internal party report. Hardliners deployed armed guards to bar moderate delegates from a county meeting last August, threatening to bring criminal trespassing charges against them, according to an email to the moderates seen by Reuters News. Penny Swan, who was exposed to the armed guards last August, one of the people who's turned away, she said to me, apparently turned away, she said to me, "This is like a coup of the Republican Party. It's like the radical right is trying to take over." Excuse me. She writes, this is Reuters now. Reuters news service writes, "Saturday's meeting is expected to cement Michigan Republicans' shift to the right. The top two candidates for state party chair have been promoting conspiracy theories in support of Trump's false claims about voter fraud. 9 other candidates are running, but they're not really seen. The moderates are like diluting their own votes, tragically." So they go on to say, Michael Traugott of the Center for Political Studies at the University of Michigan, he said, "What's going on in Michigan is a microcosm of what's going on with the GOP nationally." And I think he's absolutely right. So the question is, will the Republican Party pull itself back from the brink? I don't know. I mean, these same people now are showing up at drag shows. Again, I keep saying this. I don't get what drag shows have to do with sex. They have, dressing like you're, a different gender, or even just dressing outrageously. What does that have to do with sex? These are not sex shows. This is not pornography. We're not talking about stripper clubs. But, the fascists keep doing this. The last was, this was at in North Texas, the suburb of Princeton in North Texas, a tiny community center there. It's a small town. And up with her security. She's the head of a group called Protect Texas Kids, which baselessly claims, I'm quoting here from Candace Burns over at Truth Out, which baselessly claims to be defending children from grooming. In reality, the group is using false narratives to stoke hatred and violence against the LGBTQ community. Right-wing, far-right influencers with right-wing video streaming service Blaze TV and the KGB show showed up and started streaming this thing. So now the table got turned. The Elm Fork John Brown Gun Club. These John Brown gun clubs are popping up all over the country. These are gun clubs. Many of them are African Americans. Some of them are integrated. Some of them are even white people, as far as I can tell. And they are starting to show up at some of these events where these right-wingers are showing up with their weapons trying to intimidate people. They faced off most recently at the Elm Fork, this is the Elm Fork John Brown Club at a drag brunch event in Roanoke, Texas. That was in August of last year. That sparked a wave of far-right drag protests across the country that led to a fatal mass shooting at a drag show in Colorado Springs. 5 people were killed in November by these self-described Christian fascists. Niedert is the woman who describes herself as a Christian fascist and leads this group. She has been targeting drag events at the church in Katy, Texas, as well as theaters, venues, and restaurants in San Antonio, Grand Prairie, Texas, and Dallas. Her protests include neo-Nazi, neo-fascist, extremist militia, and Christian nationalist groups like the Aryan Freedom Network and the North and Central Texas Proud Boys. They show up armed with assault rifles and swastikas. The group threw up Nazi salutes and bore a flag depicting a swastika. A Republican state representative in Texas, Tony Tinderholt is his name, hired this woman's twin brother, Jake Niedert, as his office's legislative director. Jake Niedert, he's the brother of the woman who calls herself fascist, who's organizing these armed groups to show up at drag shows. He now works for this congressman, for this Republican state representative, and he has called for the public execution of anyone who takes their children to a drag show. And he is being funded by the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, according to this article, a fundraising group. I'm quoting from truthout.org, a piece by Candace Berndt, has been funded by the Defend Texas Liberty PAC, a fundraising group tied to West Texas oil billionaires. They named 2 of them. I'll let you look it up if you want. That has poured millions into far-right causes across the state. My question is, where are the log cabin Republicans? I mean, I used to know these, some of these log cabin Republicans. One of them was a regular on our program. I don't want to name him right now because I don't know if he still has an affiliation with them. But, he's an openly gay Republican. He's been on my program probably 30 last 15 years. Good guy, by the way. In fact, he ran for office in Kansas, and I endorsed him. It's like, according to Equality Texas, at least 63 bills supporting gay rights by Democratic lawmakers have already been filed. I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Might sneeze again here. Pardon me. There we go. Others are fighting for LGBTQ rights on the streets, forming new coalitions with armed community defense groups beyond the John Brown gun clubs. Armed members of Veterans for Equality showed up to defend a drag queen Christmas outside the Aztec Theater in San Antonio in December, for instance, some carrying weapons, some carrying concealed weapons. Veterans for Equality co-founder Jen Penna told Truthout, quote, a drag queen, when we first came into the military, we swore an oath to fight enemies, foreign and domestic. And right now we feel like the domestic part is really having an effect on us and trying to strip away our rights. You think? Incredible. And our crazy alert for the day, and then I'll get to your calls here. As South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley takes the popular position, or when she was governor, that she was taking the Confederate flag off the South Carolina flag and took down the Confederate flag over the Capitol building. Apparently Ann Coulter was not happy about that. White supremacists generally are unhappy with that kind of thing. She said that Haley should, quote, go back to her own country. Nikki Haley was born in America. Her parents are Indian immigrants. And said that Haley should, quote, not be taking down parts of American history, end quote. Yeah, right. Coulter said, I need to emigrate to India so I can demand that they start taking down parts of their history. This is my country, lady. Why don't you go back to your own country? Holy cow. I mean, this is this is beyond just bad taste or hate or bigotry and xenophobia. This is anti-American. This is un-American. This is spitting in the face of the founders of this country and the literally millions of people who have fought and died to defend this country in wars all the way back to the Revolutionary War.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'm so sick of this. It's 16 minutes past the hour. It's Anything Goes Friday, picking up your calls for the rest of the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Susan in Caldwell, Idaho. Hey, Susan. How's Idaho?
Hello.
What's up?
Well, we're your neighbor to the east, and we think we're going to take all of your eastern counties. Fox News reports that 11 of your 36 counties have voted to join Idaho.
That's true.
The land of the fantastical fascists that don't take care of their own problems. So good luck.
Yeah.
My husband keeps pointing out that Harney County, one of them, of your counties, is the least populated county in the whole country, and I think that includes Alaska. So, I mean, in persons per square mile.
Yeah.
Our legislature, which is looking at all this, won't take care of our own problems. We just came out with a study from our state university here in Boise called the Statewide Housing Analysis, where they looked at a percentage of people who are housing burdened, that HUD definition of people who are paying more than 30% of their gross income for rent and utilities. Mm-hmm. 42% of the renters and 26% of the homeowners are housing burdened, which comes out to 68% of our households in Idaho do not have money for adequate transportation. And mind you, this is a state with no public transportation and or child care. They don't have money to pay for stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But we do have our legislatures who did sponsor that bill that you mentioned, 150, Tammy Nichols, first-time senator, Judy Boyle, long-term legislator, one of our people who visited Ammon Bundy at the standoff at Mount.
Hang on a second. You're talking about the legislation to put women to death by lethal execution, by lethal injection if they have abortions outside the state. Is that the one you're talking about?
No, you brought up the one to outlaw the mRNA vaccine.
Oh, that's right. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Yeah, Judy Boyle visited Ammon Bundy while he was holding off, the state troopers at the Malheur Refuge in 2016. Yep. She won her seat back by 6 votes in the redistricting. Tammy Nichols, she's a first-term senator, one of 3 newbies in that legislature. She had been in the representatives a couple of times before, but Tammy Nichols. She's also sponsoring the annual bill to repeal our ability to do voter initiatives. They do it annually, and she's sponsoring it this time. Yeah. They won't take care of our problems. The priority of the legislature was supposed to be property tax reform in our state, which is a big problem. But now it's been superseded by transgender bathrooms in the public schools. That's their new priority.
Yeah, distract. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but see, we want about 2/3 of your land mass. If you look at a map of all the counties, they're really big in geographic presentation in Oregon, but not in economic production.
Right. It's going to require in order for part of Oregon to become part of Idaho, would require a vote of the Oregon legislature and the signature of the governor, as well as your legislature. And then it would also have to be approved by Congress. So I don't think it's going to happen.
Oh, I don't either, but let's spend some time fantasizing about that rather than taking care of the poor problems in 44 Idaho counties that are currently part of Idaho.
Exactly. I mean, this is it's like the performance stuff that Ron DeSantis is doing down in Florida, so he can ignore the crisis in his schools and in his hospitals. It's pathetic. Susan, thank you for the update. I really appreciate your insights into Idaho politics. This isn't the first time you've shared some really amazing stuff with us. Thank you so much. I'm sorry, Susan. I didn't realize you were going to say something else. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Stay with us.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
And welcome back to Anything Goes Friday. Michael in Tucson, Arizona. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hey, I'm kind of sad about the arraignment that the guy gave in Memphis, Tennessee for those 5 beasts, I won't say which species, who killed Tyree Nichols. The arraignment this morning, I want as many people as possible to know, he reassured the police that this was going to be a long, complicated trial, and he warned the rest of us. He said, that any moves to make this an unfair trial or to compromise these policemen's right to a fair trial, he would be seriously against those. He warned them not to do it. He warned us, basically the people of Memphis and the whole United States for that matter, to not hold demonstrations in favor of Tyree Nichols. And I wondered if you'd heard much about this. The arraignment this morning, I think it was this morning, I'm not sure, I heard it on NPR, but basically he reassured the cops, hey, this is going to take a long time. You're out on bail. Don't worry, we got you covered. Rhetorically, he gave that message to them. He didn't say those things exactly, and he also warned the rest of us that any behavior, that was the word he used, any behavior that might compromise those police officers' right to a fair trial would not be tolerated.
Yeah, some of that is pro forma language. It's just what you say before any trial. Some of it, my guess, and I saw a couple of blog posts about this morning, Michael. Some of it, my guess is that basically what this judge is trying to say to the right-wingers out there is, please don't put me on your death list. Please don't send me death threats. Please don't harass my family, like typically happens when anybody takes on a right-winger. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And but hopefully they do get a fair trial, and hopefully they do end up, fairly in prison for the rest of their lives, because that's where they should be. Michael, thank you. Pedro in Corpus Christi, Texas. Hey, Pedro, what's up?
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing okay, but I think I'll be doing better later on.
Okay. I'm great, but I'll get better, huh? So what's up?
My version of it, anyway.
Yeah.
I have a couple of things I wanted to bring up, Tom. First of all, I have been listening to you since the early 2000s, since the inception of Air America Radio, and I heard you on there for the first time, and I was hooked. I said to myself, oh, my God, finally somebody I can relate to, somebody that speaks the same language I speak, and I've been listening to you ever since.
Well, thank you.
And I appreciate it. I appreciate everything you do.
Thank you.
So the first thing I wanted to mention was I know that you were talking about plug-in and powering up your house from your battery in your hybrid car, which is, obviously it's possible. But two things you need to consider when you're looking at doing something. The battery is a DC output device. You have to use an inverter to convert that into
I got
AC.
that. I got that. That's the $45 contraption that I bought on Amazon that's specific to this Hyundai Ioniq 5 car. And it's got a 110 outlet. It's full 60 cycles. It's the real deal.
Right, and that's what I kind of assumed that you already had all that figured out. My warning would be that inverters are rated to only sustain a certain amount of wattage load.
Right.
The battery can provide the power, depending on the amp hour rating on the battery. Like you said, this is 100,000 amp hours or something like that.
Yeah.
It can go on forever, but at a very low rate.
Right.
If you surpass that maximum load on that, you'll end up destroying the inverter.
Right. It's 15 amps,
1,500 watts.
1,500 watts, yeah. And so
they make larger ones, that you can put on there, and you can even stack them because they're all digital now. So that
couldn't you have phase problems if you tried to? Of course, I suppose I could feed one side of my breaker box with one and the other side with another. because there's a separate outlet in the car that's also rated at 15 amps. So I could do one cord to an outlet that's connected to one side of my breaker box and another cord that's connected to the other side. They'd share ground, but they'd both be grounding against the car, so that wouldn't be a problem.
Well, I wouldn't recommend that because, a lot of times you have a little bit of bleed through, and
it might get tricky.
If the inverters are not synced, what you can do with new inverters, because they're all digital, they can sync up the output, the hertz coming out, so that they're both working simultaneously, and you can elevate the amount of load you can put on your battery. But I would not put one on one leg and one on the other leg, because they're going to be working separate, and if something happens, you may end up damaging both of them.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. And if they're even slightly out of phase, you're going to have a reduction in power, and if they're 180 degrees out of phase, you lose everything.
So. Oh yeah. If anything more than a few degrees out of phase, and you can literally destroy them, because, like I said, they're all digital. They're not like the old mechanical, which would be even worse, because then you'd have an explosion. But
yeah, I got it. Pedro, I got to run. I'm sorry, but thank you so much for the information and more food for thought. I appreciate it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-808-9925.
Hacking your house and your car. What great fun. We'll be back with your calls on Anything Goes Friday right after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. This is from the introduction. Criminology on Trump is about family business, habitual lawlessness, and the struggle for economic and political power. The central character, Donald Trump, is a con artist, a master gaslighter, and a shrewd racketeer. It is the story of how the Houdini of white-collar crime and the founder and CEO of the Trump Organization operated a criminal enterprise from within an incorporated organization beginning in 1980 and continuing up to and from within the bowels of the White House for 4 years. At the same time, it's the history of the causation of the social, psychological, and physical harms connected to the Donald and his associates before, during, and after the presidency. This book is also an account of the activities that Donald Trump pursued in order to obtain the power of Commander-in-Chief of the United States, what he then did with that power of the bully pulpit once he achieved it, and finally the lengths to which he would go to keep from losing that power. Lastly, this is the story of what many elected and appointed politicos did or did not do to acquire or to forfeit their individual shares of Trumpian power. This overall analysis of the underside of the rule of law begs the question, had the Donald not become the 45th president of the United States, would he, his children, or the Trump Organization have found themselves formal defendants and legal adversaries of the people of the state of New York? My answer unequivocally would have been no way. As of January 6, 2022, the question remains open as to whether Donald Trump, as the former president, or any of his family members will ever be indicted and prosecuted for criminal tax fraud and the other felonies, along with the Trump Organization, Inc., and its CFO, Alan Weisselberg. From the point of view of newsmaking, lawlessness, and equal justice, much of the popular discourse surrounding Trump has to do with competing narratives. The most reverberating of these has been the dueling apocalyptic narratives traversing both old and new media platforms alike. One narrative has to do with witch hunts, hoaxes, fake news, global elites, and the deep state engaging in a myriad of underworld and otherworld conspiracies to bring down Trump. The other narrative has to do with saving the U.S. democracy from authoritarianism, recovering law and order from the damage, chaos, and trauma of Trump, and restoring American normalcy without all of that political insanity. While these two narratives capture the cultural conflict, the diverse groups of people at work here and the rival social movements of incompatible interests, desires, and visions, neither speaks to the fundamental structural conditions that generate the divisiveness between these two narratives. Without ever addressing these structural relationships, the two sides will remain at loggerheads for some time to come. The medium is always, as always, is still the message. And so far in the 21st century, social media is the medium. At the same time, the weaponizing of racism, misogyny, hate, fear, intimidation, and violence vis-a-vis social media is neither new nor unique to the United States. These socio-cultural expressions of the contradictions of patriarchy, neocolonialism, and capitalism have been around since the nation's inception. Today's Proud Boys are the contemporary versions of New England churchmen in the 1700s, the Klan riders of the 1800s, or the fervent followers of Joseph McCarthy in the 1950s. Likewise, the anti-critical race theory politicians of today that do the bidding for white minority rule and racial discrimination are very much the same as John C. Calhoun fronting for the rich plantation owners during the antebellum South. The primary differences between the not-so-distant past of the last 75 years and the present have to do with the disbursements of the accumulation of capital. From post-World War II until around 1974, the United States experienced close to 3 decades of unparalleled upward social mobility, as well as a rapidly expanding middle class. However, since the mid-1970s to 2022, there's been a steady increase in economic inequality, a shrinking middle class, and downward social mobility for many. Thus, the contemporary bipartisan erosion of the liberal capitalist consensus in the United States is not the primary cause of our present democratic crisis, but it is rather symptomatic of a much broader problem that neither the Republicans, as a whole, nor most of the Democrats are willing to accept. The book, continuing, I'm referring to the inability of our bourgeois democratic system to resolve the contradictions of a political economy that promises the American dream to one and all, and yet caters to the richest 1% and provides suitably for the upper 10%. In other words, our country's present-day conflicts over identity politics, government failures, neoliberal policies, right-wing intransigencies, and climate change not only predate Donald Trump and Trumpism, but they are all fundamentally driven by the unrelenting and expanding political economy of structural inequality. What makes this Trump book different from the others is that it is the only one grounded in the scientific study of crime and social control. Criminology focuses on the pathology of harmful acts and the cultural construction of both crime and punishment. The book is Criminology on Trump by Greg Barak. Greg Barak, by the way, is an expert in criminology. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. Our podcast, The Hartmann Report, is absolutely free and available wherever fine podcasts are available. And the entire 3-hour podcast is available over at thomhartmann.com. So you don't think generally of community gardening and heart disease prevention in the same thought, in the same sentence. But sure enough, this was published in the journal Lancet Planetary Health, a study that was funded by the American Cancer Society, the first ever randomized control trial of the effects of community gardening. And what they did was they started a garden. This was in Denver. It was 291 non-gardening adults, average age 41. And they gave them half of the group. They gave them a garden plot and some seeds and seedlings and an introductory gardening course. And what they found was by the fall, that those people who were doing the gardening had increased their fiber consumption by 1.4 grams a day, 7%, which is substantial. And they believe that this will help them with everything from diabetes to certain cancers. It's absolutely a fascinating study. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 35 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. David in Palisade, Colorado. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Best beaches in the world.
The best what?
Beaches in the world.
Beaches in Colorado?
Oh, yeah. Western Slope. 3rd District, Colorado. Sound familiar?
Oh, interesting.
Lauren Boebert is my representative.
Oh, you have my sympathy.
I should. I've worked against her for the last 2 cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And this last cycle, I made thousands of phone calls, and I could really see the Boebert disgust. There was a huge swing in Indies and a few Republicans in this district. That's why it was so close.
Yeah, she just won by a couple hundred votes.
564.
There you go.
And I wanted to clear up the candidate. His name is Adam Frisch, Frisch.
Did I say something different?
You said Andy something.
Oh, Andy Frisch. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, Adam. You're right. I mix it up. I've got a good friend, Carl Frisch, who has run for political office. He used to, he's been. In fact, he filled in for me on this show. He's been a guest on our show a lot. Spells his name the same way, and so I was easily remembering Frisch, but I guess I had mixed up Andy and Adam. So it's Adam Frisch, Frisch.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, we don't want anything getting in the way of contributions.
I get it.
He has filed his papers. He is declared candidate, and he is accepting contributions.
God bless him.
Okay. And one note, so please, if you don't care for the Bobo, please send Adam some money, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard people calling her Bam Bam or Boom Boom, because she's so into guns. I mean, does she have a nickname there in Colorado, or is that just snarky stuff on the web?
Us people who were working on the campaign tend to call her Bobo. Okay.
Yeah.
But you can call her anything you want as long as we don't call her 2 years from now. Okay?
Yeah, there you go. Is that story about her husband being arrested for whipping his junk out in front of a teenage girl in a bowling alley? Does anybody care?
Actually, in the alley behind the bowling alley.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, even classier than you saw it, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is true. And she is like a 3-time GED taker, but
3 times?
Nevertheless, 3 times, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Well, she had to learn all the questions.
That's right.
So, I think they gave her the same one 3 times. I don't know. Let's not get personal. Let's not be nasty.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I was just wondering how the people in the district think of her, It's because there's a lot of baggage there.
I was going to comment on the nonpartisan commission that drew the district lines for Colorado. We picked up a new congressman in 2022, okay? Uh-huh. So we have a nonpartisan commission that draws the lines, and they did a pretty good job. I mean, if you're after competitive districts, that's what we got.
Yeah, well, they typically do, and that's a good thing for democracy, generally speaking.
Yeah.
If you didn't have half the states gerrymandered to the point that their, elections become meaningless.
And we don't have that in Colorado. Right. However, and there's always a caveat. Mm-hmm. In the district I'm in, which is about a 55-45 Republican advantage, okay, this commission inexplicably added about 1,800, 2,000 Republicans to this district. I think they were trying to make the numbers come out right. Mm-hmm. But the last thing we needed were more Republicans here. I can't help but think that last boost, where that 564 came from.
Right.
Okay.
That's why Boebert's in office, yeah.
Yeah, so let's not do that again.
Yeah,
so,
there you go.
So when you guys have nonpartisan commissions, I don't know exactly how they came about what they did, but we'll just have to work harder to defeat her.
There you go. There you go. Well, good luck, David, and let Adam Frisch, Adam, right?
Yep. Frisch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let Adam Frisch know if you have any communication with him that if he would like to come on our program and talk about his candidacy, he is more than welcome.
I will do that. Okay. I am able to do that.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, David. Good talking to you. Paul in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about the train derailment and the toxic chemical explosion from 2 weeks ago.
Is that down the road from you?
It's at our own versions of it, and that's what I wanted to get at. Mm-hmm. It seems to be gathering a lot more attention. I think it wasn't last night, maybe 2 nights ago, a derailment right outside of Detroit, or maybe it wasn't Detroit, I'm not sure, but that was in the news. And on CNBC, which is your business news network for NBC, it's the 24-hour cable business news network, they had an interview with the former CEO of CSX Railroad, which is the railroad that had this disaster in East Palestine, Ohio. And the interviewer, one of the regular anchors on the business news network, seemed pretty alarmed, was asking some very pointed questions. So this seems to be getting a lot more serious attention. It was on the network news last night, all night. The head of the EPA in the Biden administration was there on the ground. Right. Senator Sherrod Brown was there in people's living rooms. Apparently, the problem, and one of the numbers that flashed up during the CNBC interview with the former CEO, was the number of derailments in the United States in 2022. Almost 1,100. Wow. There's like 3 a day happening.
Whoa.
And I think what really alarmed people was we had one in Ohio, then just 2 or 3 nights ago, one in Detroit. Now, this is all going to drive to a point, but
there was one in Texas and one in Oregon in the last 2 days too.
Some of them are bigger than others, but on the East Coast, from Boston to Washington D.C., you have one of the most enormous networks of railroads, and they call the Tier 1 railroads. They're the big remaining, the monopolizers that have survived all the consolidations of all the railroads from the beginning of the industrialization era.
Right.
And we have commuter lines, we have commercial lines. They go into Canada, they go into the Southwest, and they go straight across the country to the West Coast.
Yeah.
And a lot of the terminal places are New York, Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore harbors. Now, here's the thing. We have oil refineries all up and down the eastern seaboard. Again, from the very beginning of industrialization, this is where oil refineries started. It's where the railroad started. So every day going through downtown Philadelphia in front of billions and tens of billions of dollars of real estate and luxury high-rise apartments or bomb trains. You can see them going along the Schuylkill River. The industrial infrastructure of America on the East Coast, they used to call it the Eastern Seaboard, is extensive. In 2015, the Amtrak, the commuter line, had one of the worst disasters, and there was extensive network and national attention paid to it. The people that were injured on it, one of them was a U.S. congressman from Bucks County here in our region. The person who just got off the train before it crashed in Philadelphia was the senator from Delaware, Chris Coons. And we all know who used to take the Metroliner every day from almost every day out of Washington, D.C. He's president now.
Yeah.
He was just in Baltimore. They're going to fix a tunnel there, a tunnel that's like 100 years old.
Yeah.
Now, when they did the analysis of the problem, the braking system goes back to the Civil War era.
Yep.
And in 2009, they passed the Railroad Safety Act, mandating what's called positive train control, and it's a modern system.
Trump overrode it, didn't he?
I believe that he did, but he shut it down.
There you go.
But we're talking about 2009. It's going on 15 years since it should have been implemented.
I'm with you, Paul. We do not allow private individuals, generally speaking. I mean, there are a couple of exceptions here where some of the toll roads have been sold off to companies, one to an Australian company, another to an Italian company, and some of these toll roads in the Midwest. But generally speaking, our road systems are publicly owned. They're either federally owned and administered, the interstate highway system. There's state roads, there's county roads, there's city roads.
Right.
And yet our rail which is arguably every bit as vital infrastructure, particularly if you look at it from an economic point of view. Our rail is all privately owned now, or almost all privately owned. And that was not the case 70, 80 years ago. Pardon?
I said the commercial is what. Here's the difference. You're just to make your point validated. You have commuter rail lines, which are basically public authorities that are stitched together from the leftover railroads. In the Philadelphia area, the old Reading and Pennsylvania Railroad commuter lines have been incorporated to something called SEPTA, which is Southeastern Pennsylvania Transportation Authority. They implemented the 2009 law. They were one of only 2 railroad systems in the entire country that put it into effect.
The point I was making, though, is that I think that it's time to nationalize the railroad, the beds. You know?
Well, we're going to have to, because they're not investing money. Here's the final point. It's a slum. There are slum lords. Yeah. They haven't built any new railroads. They haven't invested the capital investment. They drag their feet and they get their buddies to get them out of the need to invest any money.
And they're making billions in profits. Billions. I'm with you, Paul. I'm completely with you. Paul, thank you so much. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I really do think it is time for us to say, enough is enough. The railroad, the rail lines of America belong to America. And welcome back. And let's see here, Randy in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Hey, Randy, you wanted to talk about my electrical scheme?
Yeah, Tom, real quick. I've been an electronics technician since 1971, and I've seen a lot of unintentional things happen, shall we say.
Yeah, kludges.
Bottom line is, what you are probably best needing is an inverter charger with UPS or transfer function.
Okay.
And that's what I have in my house. I have a critical sump pump system in my basement, which if the power goes out, my basement floods continuously. So I now sleep well at night knowing that power goes out, I'm good for days at a time.
Right, so you've got a battery on the thing that's driving the inverter, and the inverter is smart enough to know which way the power is flowing, whether it needs to draw from the battery or charge the battery.
Right, there's a nice little display that constantly tells me, 30 feet away, I can see the display. Oh, I'm on AC. Oh, I'm on battery, and I'm at such and such efficiency. So that lets me sleep at night. Now, to your specific situation, if you are going to proceed with this, I would highly recommend, at a minimum, using something like, and I'm not endorsing brands, but a typical example, Hubble, for instance, makes some lovely things that are known as twist and lock connectors. They're a NEMA standard device. You probably see them on like dryers and stoves and whatnot. Basically, you have a series of curved tongs that stick in and twist to the right to engage and twist to the left.
I'm familiar with what you're talking about. I don't think, in fact, I know for a fact, the electrical outlet on the wall and the electrical outlet on the adapter that I just bought for the Ionic 5 are both just standard 110 outlets.
And that's your problem, because when the insurance underwriter denies your claim because your house caught on fire because, oopsie, the plug just fell out because a truck drove by and it popped out of the wall.
Right.
It just...
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've seen too many horror stories. So from an actuarial standpoint and a denial of claim standpoint...
Right. Well, I could replace that outlet in the garage that my... power supply from
you
a
can
car.
just wire a pigtail. You can wire a pigtail in permanently and then put a twist and lock female hanging below that.
You're right. I could do that. Yeah.
So that would be a safer approach if you want to. Now, the other issue to look at is all brands, I don't care who they are, do not believe the BS regarding their ratings. If it says 1,000 watts, may be good for 400, 500. If it says 3,000 watts, may be good for 1,200.
You're talking the inverter?
Yeah, all of them. All of them. Inverter chargers, all that stuff. Right. Just the old military rule of thumb is derate by 50%.
Yeah.
Just to be on the safe side. Because you do not want to be operating stuff at 80, 90, 100% of margin.
No, I'm totally with you on that. My plan is to kill all my 220 breakers, So, there's no possibility that the heating system, for example, is going to try and kick on or anything like that. And then go around the house and manually turn off all appliances, and then fire it up, and then basically just, send electricity to whatever. I can turn on and off lights. And my goal is to have the TV, the internet, and my computers operating. And in aggregate, those things don't draw 15 amps.
Now, the old standard military phrasing was, no good plan ever survives contact with the enemy. Yes. Highly recommend that you use padlock interlocks like we do in industry. Because when I go to work on a high-voltage system in a power plant or a factory somewhere, everybody has padlocks and keys. That's how people stay alive.
That makes sense. Randy, thank you.
Good luck, Tom.
Thanks a lot.
Take care. Bye-bye.
We'll be right back. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So everybody knows that George Santos is from a district that Joe Biden won by 16 points, New York's 3rd district, although there was a kind of a gerrymandering, a reapportionment thing that happened there. But it's generally a Democratic district, and if Santos falls, there's probably going to be a Democratic replacement. But that's just the beginning of the story. David Vallejo in California's 22nd district, for example, represents a district that Biden carried by 16 points. Young Kim in California's 40th, Biden carried by 15 points. Mike Garcia in California's 27th, Biden carried by 18 points. Biden carried by 11 points, Oregon's 5th, Lori Chavez Duremer. Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania's 1st, Biden carried it by 14 points. I've got a whole video that lists all of these. There's 18 of them that should be easy pickups for the Democrats in 2024. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Anyhow, welcome back. 52 minutes past the hour. And where are we? Oh, yeah, we're picking up your phone calls. So, Rick in Seattle. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. Can you hear me?
Just fine.
Oh, good. My phone was kind of getting a little low on power. I mentioned George Washington Carver to your screener person. Have you ever heard of that person?
Is he the guy who invented peanut butter?
Well, he did a lot more than that.
I
learned about him in...
He's a black scientist who was brilliant, actually, back in the day.
Yeah, from Tuskegee University. And, he invented like hundreds, maybe thousands of different polymers and pastes and different paints and things, too. And I thought, well, between that and growing hemp, those are good alternatives for using chemical products that just, ruin the environment.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe eventually we could get rid of some of those chemicals in our bodies.
So we should be using more products like he developed that were basically plant-based. Is that your point?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Also.
Yeah, and he was quite a guy. He was one of the few black people that we studied when I was in elementary school. I mean, he was apparently also just an extraordinarily decent human being. Rick, thank you. Thanks for that. Dean in Los Angeles. Hey, Dean, what's on your mind today?
Good afternoon, Tom. Hey, I just wanted to remark regarding that earlier. I love that quote, FDR, that you play.
Yes. Let me warn you about the smooth evasion.
Look, such an orator. I can't wait till we have somebody step forward like that about a year from now. My feeling is that I think we need to just watch closely to the words they use when Republicans are going to come across debates over Social Security. Because you know what they do is that if we argue, if a liberal says, you're going to destroy Social Security, they're going to say, oh, no, we're not.
Reform
and they'll use a fancy verb. No, we're going to reform. We're going to improve it.
Yes.
Or they'll get even better and say, we're going to streamline or modernize. And you'll know immediately, in my opinion, what they're really going to do is attempt to do what they've managed to do with Medicare and say, oh, no, we're just making Social Security Part B.
Right. Medicare is half privatized now, and they're going to try and do the same thing with Social Security. They'll probably call it Social Security Advantage.
Right, yeah, Social Security Advantage, great.
I am with you. Dean, I got to run. I want to try and get one more call in before the end of the show for the week. Thank you for the call. Jeff in San Francisco. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Oh, national health care, I think, is another thing we need to nationalize. Well, I'm trying to get a new doctor, and I go to the website of my insurance company, and I call one of these doctors, and they says, we don't take health insurance, it's out of pocket. And it's on the website.
Wow.
So and they go, what? No, you have to pay. And then it's like they try to get you every which way, and it's insane. These insurance companies, we need to outlaw for-profit insurance companies, basically.
I agree.
As far as I can see.
I agree. They are giant parasitic leeches attached to the back of the American people, and they're sucking the blood out every day.
Yeah, I still need to read your book about national health care. I'm not sure what it's called.
Well, it'll raise your blood pressure, I can tell you that. I got to run, Jeff. I'm sorry, we're out of time, but thank you. Thank you for your comments. Hey, special thanks to Louise Hartman, Sean Taylor, Nate Atwell, Jamie Holly, Joyce the Hammer, Nance, Nigel Peacock, Sue Nethercutt, Patrick Hoyt, Geraldine Halbert, Ron Hartenbaum, Chase Spross, Nicholas Miller, Pat Sweeney, Jay LeBlanc, Al Gorilla Rhythm, Connor Arroyo, and Carnaverity, all the great folks who work on this program, help bring you our, whatever it is I'm doing here every day, 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. God bless them all. And thank you. Thank you for, I've been hearing from people, from stations. People have been calling our stations, thanking them for the show. They've been calling our sponsors. They've been responding to the fundraisers of our nonprofits. Thank you. Get out there, get active, tag You're It. Have a great weekend.
To Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1 hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3 hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.